What if I told you there's a truck from an obscure 80s TV show that costs more to build than most people's houses? A vehicle so bizarre that it looks like it drove straight out of a cyberpunk fever dream into our reality. We're talking about Jetto's truck from the Highwayman. And trust me, the story behind this rolling piece of retrofuturism is even stranger than it looks. Today we're counting down 20 seriously weird facts about one of television's most insane vehicles. And before we dive into this madness, hit that like button and subscribe, because this channel is where forgotten TV gold comes back to life. Number 20. The truck is actually built on a Peterbilt platform, though you'd never guess it from looking at the thing. Underneath all that futuristic bodywork and bizarre styling sits the bones of a regular Peterbilt truck. But here's where it gets interesting. The builders took this completely normal commercial truck platform and transformed it into something that looks like it escaped from a science fiction movie. They essentially wrapped a conventional truck in a shell of pure 80s excess. The original Peterbilt frame and running gear are still there, buried under layers of custom fabrication. It's like putting a tuxedo on a bulldozer. The transformation was so complete that most people who see it have no idea there's a standard truck hiding underneath. The builders had to modify almost every visible surface to achieve that sleek, futuristic look. They lowered the cab profile, extended body panels, and created entirely new aerodynamic surfaces, all while keeping the basic Peterbilt mechanicals functional. Number 19, its design was directly inspired by the German Steinwinter supercargo 20.40 concept from the early 80s. Now this is where things get really fascinating. The Steinwinter was this absolutely insane German concept truck that looked like someone squashed a regular semi with a giant hydraulic press. It had the cab sitting lower than the wheels. Think about that for a second. The driver sat below the wheel line. It was supposed to be more aerodynamic and allow for taller cargo loads while staying within height restrictions. The concept was so radical that it made headlines across Europe, but it was also completely impractical for real-world use. Visibility was terrible. Getting in and out required gymnastics, and good luck servicing the engine. When the Highwayman's designers saw the Steinwinter, they thought, perfect, let's put that on American television. They took the most impractical elements of the German concept and somehow made them even more extreme. The result was Jetto's truck, which managed to be even lower and sleeker than its inspiration. Number 18. Though it looks like a cab under truck, it's really just a cleverly disguised Peterbilt made to appear futuristic. This is automotive illusion at its finest. Cab under trucks, where the cabin sits directly over the engine, were common in Europe but less so in America. They're shorter, more maneuverable, and can carry longer trailers within the same overall length restrictions. But Jetto's truck isn't actually a cab under design at all. It's a conventional Peterbilt with the cab behind the engine, just heavily modified to create the illusion of a cab under configuration. The builders used custom bodywork to extend the nose forward and lower the roofline dramatically. They created false body panels that hide the actual mechanical layout. From the outside, you'd swear the driver is sitting right on top of the front axle, but it's all smoke and mirrors, or rather steel and creative fabrication. The real genius is how they managed to maintain the truck's functionality while completely changing its appearance. It still drives like a regular truck, even though it looks like something from another planet. Number 17. The conversion reportedly cost $287,000 to transform the original cab over into this show rig. Let that number sink in for a moment. $287,000. In 1987, money. That's over $700,000 in today's dollars. For a truck that appeared in a TV show that lasted exactly one season. To put this in perspective, you could buy an actual house in Los Angeles for less than that in 1987. A really nice house. The production company essentially spent luxury home money on a single vehicle prop, and this wasn't even the main hero truck of the show. This was the secondary vehicle, the sidekick's ride. Imagine being the accountant who had to sign off on that expense report. The cost included custom fabrication of virtually every body panel, a complete redesign of the interior, installation of special effects equipment for the show, and countless hours of skilled labor. They basically built a concept car from scratch using a truck as the starting point. No wonder the show only lasted one season with that kind of budget. Number 16. The original power plant was an 8V92 T Detroit diesel engine. Now we're talking about serious hardware here. The 8V92T wasn't just any engine. This was Detroit Diesel's two-stroke screamer, a motor that sounds like nothing else on the road. These engines were notorious for being incredibly loud, smoking like chimneys and having a distinctive whine that could wake the dead. The 8V configuration meant 8 cylinders in a V layout, with 92 cubic inches per cylinder. The T stood for turbocharged. This thing was breathing through a massive turbocharger that could probably suck in small birds. In stock form, these engines made around 350 horsepower, but they could be tuned for much more. The 2-stroke design meant it fired on every revolution, not every other revolution like a 4-stroke. Double the power pulses, double the noise, double the smoke. Perfect for a post-apocalyptic TV show. These engines were workhorses in the trucking industry, known for being nearly indestructible if maintained properly. They'd run forever, screaming and smoking the whole time. Number 15. According to a later listing, the truck had or claimed to have 700 horsepower under the hood. 700 horses. From a Detroit diesel, that's serious modification territory. To get that kind of power from an 8V92, you'd need major upgrades. We're talking bigger turbochargers, modified injection pumps, upgraded internals, and probably a prayer to the diesel gods. Stock, these engines made about half that power. So someone went absolutely crazy with the modifications, whether it actually made 700 horsepower or that was just optimistic advertising is anyone's guess, but even if it made 500, that's still impressive for the era. The thing is, Detroit 2-strokes could be hot-rodded to insane levels. Truck pullers and drag racers would push these engines to over 1,000 horsepower. Of course, they'd only last about 30 seconds at that power level before turning into expensive boat anchors. But for a TV show truck that needed to look and sound impressive, 700 horsepower would definitely do the job. Imagine the sound this thing made at full throttle. The 2-stroke scream combined with turbo whistle must have been absolutely deafening. Number 14, the show truck's body was apparently made from steel, not lightweight fiberglass as you might expect. This is actually bizarre when you think about it. Most TV and movie vehicles use fiberglass bodies because they're lighter, easier to modify, and cheaper to produce. But Jetto's truck went the hard route with actual steel fabrication. Every custom panel was hand-formed from steel sheets. This added tremendous weight to an already heavy vehicle. We're talking thousands of extra pounds of steel just for the cosmetic modifications. The builders must have had a reason for choosing steel over fiberglass. Maybe they wanted the durability for the stunts planned in the show. Maybe they needed the structural strength for the radical design. Or maybe they just wanted to do things the hard way. Steel fabrication at this level requires serious skill. You can't just mold it like fiberglass. Every curve, every angle had to be hammered, rolled, or pressed into shape, then welded together with precision, then ground smooth and finished. The amount of labor involved is staggering. Number 13. In the series, the front half of Jetto's truck could detach and transform into a low-slung, futuristic car. Yes, you heard that right. Transform, like a transformer, but terrible. This was peak 80s television logic at work. The truck could somehow split in half with the front section becoming an independent vehicle. The special effects for this transformation were, well, they were 1980s TV special effects. Let's just say it required a lot of imagination from the viewers. In reality, of course, the truck couldn't actually do this. They used multiple vehicles and creative editing to create the illusion. But the idea that this massive truck could just split apart and become 2 vehicles was gloriously absurd. The car mode was supposed to be for situations where Jetto needed something smaller and more maneuverable. Because apparently, a regular car was too boring for this show. No, they needed a car that was birthed from a truck like some kind of mechanical Russian nesting doll. The physics of how this would work were completely ignored. Where did the engine for the car come from? How did the steering work? Don't ask questions, just enjoy the 80s madness. Number 12. The truck's design takes more direct inspiration from the Steinwinter concept than even the main Highwayman hero truck. This is actually a fascinating detail that most people miss. While the main truck driven by the show's protagonist was futuristic, Jetto's truck was the one that really pushed the boundaries of believability. The Steinwinter influence is everywhere in the design. The ultra-low cab position, the way the trailer seems to float above the tractor, the aerodynamic styling that prioritizes looks over practicality. They took every extreme element of the Steinwinter and cranked it up to 11. Where the German concept at least tried to be somewhat practical, Jetto's truck threw practicality out the window. The cab is so low that the driver can barely see over the dashboard. The aerodynamics are so aggressive that getting in and out requires contortionist skills. It's like they looked at the Steinwinter and said, this is too reasonable, let's make it crazier. The irony is that the Steinwinter itself never went into production because it was too impractical. So they based a TV truck on a failed concept and made it even less practical. Number 11. Fans have noticed that the truck seems to use first-generation Chevy S10 doors, which is bizarre on a rig of this scale. Imagine this, you have a massive custom truck that costs nearly $300,000 to build. It has revolutionary styling and futuristic design elements, and then you slap on doors from a compact pickup truck, first-gen S10 doors. From a Chevy compact pickup, on a vehicle that's supposed to be the ultimate in futuristic transportation, the size difference alone is hilarious. It's like putting a doggy door on a barn. These doors would look comically small on the massive truck body, but apparently, they made it work somehow. Maybe the doors were heavily modified. Maybe they just used the door mechanisms and built custom skins. Or maybe someone in the prop department had a bunch of S10 doors lying around and figured why not. This kind of parts bin engineering was actually common in TV vehicle building. You use what you can find and modify it to fit. But using compact pickup doors on a semi-truck is taking that philosophy to an absurd extreme. Number 10. According to auction paperwork, the truck was registered as a 1982 Peterbilt. This little detail tells us a lot about the truck's origins. It started life as a 1982 Peterbilt, probably a conventional cab-over or standard configuration truck. By the time the builders were done with it, nothing about it looked like a 1982 anything. But legally, on paper, it was still just a modified 1982 Peterbilt. The registration is important because it means this thing was actually street legal, at least at some point. You could theoretically drive this madness on public roads. Imagine pulling up to a truck stop in this thing. The other truckers would either think you're insane or from the future. The DMV clerk who had to process this registration must have had some questions. Sir, you say this is a 1982 Peterbilt, are you sure? Because it looks like something from a Japanese anime. But as long as it had the proper VIN numbers and met safety requirements, they had to register it. Somehow, this rolling sculpture passed whatever inspections were required, which either says something about the quality of the build or the leniency of 1980s vehicle regulations. Number 9. After the show ended, John Ward Motorsports, who built it, reportedly started converting it into a motorhome complete with washer, dryer, and hot water. Because what else do you do with a $300,000 TV prop truck? You turn it into an RV, obviously. John Ward Motorsports apparently looked at this thing and thought, you know what this needs? A kitchenette. The idea of turning Jetto's futuristic war wagon into a recreational vehicle is so perfectly absurd, they were going to install a full bathroom, sleeping quarters, kitchen facilities, and yes, a washer and dryer. In a truck designed for a post-apocalyptic TV show. Imagine camping in this thing. You roll into a KOA campground looking like you're ready for nuclear war, then you step out and ask where the hookups are for your gray water. The conversion was never fully completed, which is probably for the best. The world wasn't ready for Jetto's truck to become someone's retirement vehicle. Though the idea of some elderly couple touring national parks in this thing is absolutely hilarious. The washer and dryer detail is especially great, because nothing says hardcore survival vehicle like permanent press settings. Number 8. The truck has been listed for sale multiple times as a culture prop vehicle. Showing up in various Craigslist ads over the years, this thing has been passed around more than a bad penny. Every few years it pops up on Craigslist or some other classified site with increasingly creative descriptions. For sale, one slightly used post-apocalyptic death machine. Great for intimidating neighbors or starting your own cult. The asking prices have been all over the map. Sometimes they want $50,000. Sometimes they want $200,000. It depends on how optimistic the seller is feeling that day. The Craigslist ads are works of art themselves. They always emphasize the TV connection, like that's going to make someone suddenly need a massive, impractical truck, as seen on the Highwayman. You know, that show you've definitely never heard of. Some listings claim it rins and drives. Others are suspiciously vague about its mechanical condition. The photos always look like they were taken in abandoned warehouses or sketchy storage facilities, which is probably where this thing has spent most of its post-TV life, being moved from warehouse to warehouse by increasingly confused owners who have no idea what to do with it. Number 7. The truck features side striping that some believe evokes Ferrari Testarossa side strakes. adding to its very 80s futuristic aesthetic, because when you're designing a truck for a post-apocalyptic TV show, you obviously need to reference Italian supercars. The Testarossa connection is actually brilliant in its absurdity. The Ferrari Testarossa, with its iconic side strakes, was the epitome of 80s excess. So naturally, someone thought, let's put that on a semi-truck. The striping on Jetto's truck does have that distinctive horizontal line pattern reminiscent of the Testarossa's cooling vents, except instead of functional cooling vents for a mid-mounted engine, these are just decorative stripes on a diesel truck. It's the automotive equivalent of putting a spoiler on a minivan. Pure aesthetics with zero function. But it perfectly captures that 80s design philosophy where everything needed to look fast and futuristic, even if it was neither. The combination of German concept truck influence and Italian supercar styling on an American semi is peak 80s fusion. It's like the United Nations of questionable design choices. Number 6, some people claim parts of the truck are literally from a Steinwinter supercargo prototype, though this has never been confirmed. This is where we enter conspiracy theory territory. The legend goes that the builders somehow acquired actual parts from one of the few Steinwinter prototypes and incorporated them into Jetto's truck. If true, this would be incredible. There were only a handful of Steinwinter prototypes ever built. Getting parts from one would be like finding pieces of the Holy Grail. But it would explain why the design is so authentically Steinwinter-like. Maybe they got the cab structure, maybe some body panels, maybe just the blueprints. Nobody really knows. The timeline sort of works. The Steinwinter prototypes were built in the early 80s. The Highwayman started production in 1987. There would have been time for parts to make their way from Germany to Hollywood, but it seems more likely that the builders just studied photos and copied the design. Still, the rumor persists. And honestly, given how weird everything else about this truck is, would anyone be surprised if it turned out to be true? This thing already defies logic in every other way. Number 5. Despite looking completely insane, reports say it was roadworthy and registered at one point, meaning you could legally drive it on public roads. Let that sink in. This thing, this monument to 80s excess, was street legal. You could take it through a McDonald's drive-thru. Though good luck making that turn radius, the idea that this passed any kind of safety inspection is mind-boggling. The visibility from that ultra-low cab position must be terrible. The blind spots probably extend to different zip codes, but somehow, somewhere, some brave DMV employee looked at this thing and said, "Sure, here's your registration. Have fun terrifying other motorists." Imagine being passed by this on the highway, you'd think you were hallucinating. Or that a movie was being filmed. Or that the apocalypse had started and nobody told you. The registration also means someone had to insure this thing. Picture that conversation with the insurance agent. "So Mr. Johnson, you say you have a 1982 Peterbilt? Any modifications we should know about?" "Well, it looks like it's from space and the front turns into a car." "I see. Let me transfer you to our science fiction department." Number 4. Jetto's truck, or one very similar to it, reportedly appeared in the first episode of Power Rangers Time Force in 2001. The truck apparently had a second career after the Highwayman, showing up over a decade later in Power Rangers. Because where else would a transforming futuristic truck fit in better than Power Rangers? Time Force was the Power Rangers series set in the future, so the truck's aesthetic actually worked perfectly. It probably required less explanation there than it did in the Highwayman. In the Power Rangers universe, a truck that can split into two vehicles is just Tuesday. The kids watching probably didn't even question it. Of course the truck transforms. Everything transforms in Power Rangers. The fact that this truck found work in another show 13 years after the Highwayman is actually impressive. Most TV vehicles end up rusting in backlots or getting parted out, but Jetto's truck was so uniquely weird that it found a second life. It's like the character actor of vehicles. Sure, it can only play one type of role, futuristic madness, but it plays it well. Number 3, as of a few years ago, the truck was owned by Highwayman USA Inc., a tattoo shop organization with an obvious connection to the show. A tattoo shop owns Jetto's truck, because of course it does. Where else would this thing end up? Highwaymen USA Inc. either really loves the show or really loves having the most insane vehicle in their parking lot. Probably both. Imagine getting a tattoo and looking out the window to see this thing parked outside. It would definitely set a certain mood. The shop probably uses it for promotional events. Nothing says professional tattoo establishment like a post-apocalyptic TV truck parked out front. It's actually a brilliant marketing move. The connection to the show's name is obvious, and the truck itself is so visually striking that it's basically a rolling billboard. You're not going to forget the tattoo shop with the insane truck. Whether they actually drive it or it just sits there as the world's most expensive lawn ornament is unknown. But either way, it's found a home with people who appreciate its particular brand of weirdness. Number 2. The futuristic cab sits unusually low under the trailer, giving it that sleek skateboard-like appearance that defies conventional truck design. This is the key design element that makes Jetto's truck so visually striking. Normal trucks have the cab sitting high and proud. Jetto's truck looks like someone stepped on it. The cab is so low it's practically subterranean. The trailer appears to float above it like it's levitating. From certain angles, it barely looks like the cab and trailer are connected. It's an optical illusion created by clever design and absolute disregard for practicality. The skateboard comparison is perfect. It looks like you could kick flip the entire truck. The low profile was supposed to make it more aerodynamic and futuristic looking. Mission accomplished on the futuristic part. The aerodynamics are questionable, but the visual impact is undeniable. This thing looks like nothing else on the road. Before or since, it's such a radical departure from normal truck design that your brain struggles to process what you're looking at. Is it a truck? Is it a spacecraft? Is it a hallucination? Yes to all three. Number 1, the truck perfectly matches Jetto's character as an outback survivalist, combining rugged off-road styling with sci-fi touches in a way that defines 80s retrofuturism. This is what makes Jetto's truck truly special. It wasn't just a random vehicle, it was character development on wheels. Jetto was portrayed as this hardcore survivalist living in the wasteland. His truck needed to look like it could handle the apocalypse while also being from the future. And somehow, they nailed it. The combination of brutal functionality and science fiction design is perfect 80s television. It's practical enough to be believable as a survival vehicle, but weird enough to be memorable. The steel construction gives it that indestructible feel. The futuristic styling says this guy is prepared for anything. The fact that it can supposedly transform just adds to the mystique. This is a vehicle for someone who expects the unexpected. In a show full of weird vehicles, Jetto's truck stood out as the weirdest. It took everything about 80s design excess and condensed it into one impossible vehicle. It's simultaneously the most impractical and most awesome truck ever built for television. And that's exactly what makes it perfect. And there you have it. That's 20. Absolutely insane facts about Jetto's truck from the Highwayman, a vehicle so bizarre it makes Mad Max's rides look practical. This thing costs more than a house, sounds like a dragon with bronchitis, and somehow ended up at a tattoo parlor. Did you know this show existed? Have you ever seen this truck in person? Let us know in the comments below, because we need to know we're not the only ones obsessed with obscure 80s television vehicles. If you enjoyed this deep dive into TV's strangest machinery, smash that like button and subscribe for more forgotten gems from television's weird history. We'll see you next time. Number 20. The cab could supposedly fly off as a helicopter. Let's start with the most ridiculous feature that never actually worked. In the pilot episode, they told us with a straight face that the front cab of this truck could detach and fly away as a gyrocopter. Yes, seriously, the cab of a semi-truck becoming a helicopter. This wasn't just some throwaway line either. They actually showed it happening through special effects that were, well, let's just say they were ambitious for 1987. The idea was that Highway, the main character, could separate the cab in emergencies and take to the skies. Think about that for a second. You're driving an 18-wheeler down the interstate, bad guys are chasing you, and suddenly, your solution is to turn your driver's seat into a flying machine. The physics alone would make Newton cry. But here's the thing, they only did this once, in the pilot. After that, the producers apparently realized how insane this looked and quietly pretended it never happened. The feature disappeared faster than the show's ratings. For the rest of the series, that cab stayed firmly attached to the truck like nature intended. But the visual effects team had already built this elaborate helicopter nose design into the cab, so they were stuck with a truck that looked like it wanted to fly but never would again. It's like buying a convertible and then welding the roof shut. Number 19. It had an invisible stealth mode that vanished from the show. If you thought the flying cab was peak absurdity, wait until you hear about the stealth mode. In that same pilot episode, this massive semi-truck could supposedly turn invisible. Not camouflaged, not hard to see. Invisible. Like Wonder Woman's jet, but weighing 40 tons and powered by diesel. The show presented this with complete seriousness. Highway would flip a switch, and this enormous rig would shimmer and disappear from view. Because nothing says covert operations like an invisible 18-wheeler barreling down the highway creating mysterious wind gusts. and leaving tire tracks from nowhere. The special effects for this were exactly what you'd expect from 1987 television on a budget. Some sparkly overlay effects and then cutting to shots where the truck just wasn't there. Revolutionary stuff. But just like the helicopter cab, this feature mysteriously vanished after the pilot. The series producers must have had a meeting where someone finally asked how much it would cost to make the truck invisible in every episode. The answer was apparently more than NBC wants to spend. So they dropped it completely. No explanation. No, the stealth system broke. Nothing. The truck just forgot how to turn invisible, and everyone pretended it never could. This might be the only case in TV history where a vehicle's superpowers got downgrades between the pilot and series. It's like if Kite suddenly forgot how to talk after episode 1. Number 18. The dashboard was recycled from Knight Rider. Here's where things get wonderfully cheap and creative. When they were building the interior of this supposedly cutting-edge future truck, the production team needed high-tech dashboard components. Did they design new ones? Did they innovate? No. They went dumpster diving in the Knight Rider prop warehouse. That's right. Some of Kit's dashboard ended up in the Highwayman truck. Those blinking lights and random switches that made Kit look so futuristic in 1982 were apparently still futuristic enough for 1987. It's actually kind of poetic when you think about it. Kit was a talking car that fought crime. The Highwayman truck was a semi that fought crime. Both shows were produced by Glenn A. Larson. It's like a weird family reunion where the younger sibling gets the older sibling's hand-me-downs, except the hand-me-downs are crime-fighting computer interfaces. The props department basically said, why spend money on new fake computers when we have perfectly good fake computers gathering dust? This wasn't even subtle. Anyone who watched both shows could spot the similarities immediately. Those distinctive LED displays, those specific toggle switches, that particular shade of black plastic. It was Kit's DNA spliced into a bigger, dumber vehicle. Imagine being a prop master and getting the assignment to make this truck's interior look futuristic. Then being told your budget is whatever you can steal from the Knight Rider storage unit. Number 17. It cost more than most houses to build. Now, let's talk money, because the numbers involved in creating this monstrosity are absolutely insane. Different sources cite different figures, but they're all astronomical. The basic conversion from regular Kenworth to sci-fi nightmare supposedly cost $287,000. In 1987 money, that's over $700,000 in today's dollars. For reference, the median home price in America in 1987 was about $80,000. They could have bought 3.5 houses for what they spent making one truck look weird. But wait, it gets crazier. Some sources claim the total build cost was actually $500,000, $500,000. In the 80s, that's over $1.2 million today for one vehicle. That appeared in 9 episodes of a failed TV show. Let that sink in. They spent Ferrari money on a Kenworth. They spent mansion money on a prop. This wasn't even a truck that could actually do the things it claimed to do. It couldn't turn invisible. The cab couldn't fly. It was just a really expensive costume for a regular truck. John Ward Motorsports, the company that did the conversion, must have been laughing all the way to the bank. Imagine that invoice. Labor for making truck look like helicopter, $50,000. Materials for unnecessary wings, $30,000. Making NBC executives believe this is a good idea, priceless. Number 16. The nose was designed to look like a French military helicopter. The front of this truck is probably its most distinctive feature, and it's based on something oddly specific. That pointed, angular nose that makes the truck look like it's about to take off. It's styled after an aerospatial Gazelle helicopter, a French military helicopter. Because when you're designing an American TV truck for a show about highway patrol, obviously your first reference should be French military aviation. The Gazelle is actually a pretty cool helicopter, used by military forces around the world. But welding its nose onto a semi-truck is like putting a fighter jet canopy on a school bus. It doesn't make the school bus fly. It just makes it look confused. The design team really committed to this aesthetic, though. They didn't just slap a vaguely helicopter-shaped piece on the front. They studied the Gazelle's distinctive nose profile, its window configuration, even its subtle aerodynamic curves. Then they scaled it up and attached it to something that has the aerodynamics of a brick wall. What's even weirder is that they never explain why the truck looks like this in the show's universe. Did someone in this near future world just decide that trucks needed to be more helicopter-like? Was there a sale on helicopter parts? The show treats this design choice as completely normal. Like every truck in 1992 would obviously have aviation-inspired bodywork. The irony is that the Gazelle is known for being a nimble, lightweight helicopter. This truck probably weighed 20 times what a Gazelle weighs. Number 15. John Ward Motorsports, built it in Alpine, Texas. The company responsible for this magnificent monstrosity was John Ward Motorsports, based in Alpine, Texas, not Los Angeles, not Detroit. Alpine, Texas, a town of 6,000 people in the middle of nowhere, West Texas. This is where they decided to build the future of television vehicles. John Ward Motorsports wasn't some massive Hollywood prop house. They were a relatively small custom shop that somehow landed the contract to build one of the most elaborate TV vehicles ever created. Imagine being a mechanic in Alpine, Texas, and having NBC show up with a Kenworth and a briefcase full of money, asking you to make it look like it came from the future. The logistics alone are mind-boggling. Alpine is about 200 miles from El Paso, 400 miles from San Antonio, and basically in the middle of the desert. Getting specialized parts and materials to build this thing must have been a nightmare. Every custom piece, every specialized component had to be trucked in from somewhere else. But they pulled it off. This small Texas shop created something so unique, so bizarre, that people are still talking about it 35 years later. They took a standard 1980 Kenworth cab over and transformed it into something that looked like it escaped from a fever dream. The fact that this build happened in Alpine, Texas, adds another layer of weirdness to the whole story. It's like finding out the Batmobile was built in a barn in Kansas. Number 14. It had a hidden Lotus Esprit in the trailer. Because apparently a helicopter-nosed invisible semi-truck wasn't enough, the producers decided to hide a sports car inside it. Specifically, a Lotus Esprit. The same model that James Bond drove underwater in The Spy Who Loved Me, because if you're going to go over the top, why not go all the way? The Esprit was supposedly Highway's pursuit vehicle. When the truck was too big or too slow, he could deploy this sleek British sports car from the trailer's rear. It's like an automotive Russian nesting doll. A car inside a truck that thinks it's a helicopter. The logistics of this are hilarious. First, you need a trailer big enough to carry a car while still having room for all the crime-fighting equipment. Then, you need some kind of ramp system. Then, you need to explain why a government agent needs both a semi-truck and a Lotus. It's not like he could chase bad guys through narrow alleys in the Kenworth. The Lotus itself was modified to look more futuristic because a regular Esprit apparently wasn't sci-fi enough for this show. They added extra lights, some aerodynamic bits, and probably some of those leftover Knight Rider dashboard pieces. In reality, having a Lotus Esprit hidden in your truck would be about as practical as having a swimming pool in your attic. The weight distribution alone would be a nightmare. But this show wasn't about practicality. It was about having as many cool vehicles as possible. Logic be damned. Number 13, the base truck was a 1980 Kenworth cab over. Let's talk about what this thing actually was underneath all the crazy modifications. The foundation of this whole project was a 1980 Kenworth cab over truck. For those who don't speak trucker, a cab over means the cab sits directly over the engine rather than having the engine out front like a conventional truck. This design was popular in the 70s and 80s because it maximized cargo space while keeping the overall length down. Choosing a cab over as the base was actually pretty smart from a design perspective. The flat face and high seating position already looked kind of futuristic compared to conventional trucks. It gave them a good starting point for their helicopter nose modification, plus the cab over design meant the engine was easily accessible from inside, which worked well for all the fake high-tech equipment they needed to install. This particular Kenworth was 7 years old when they started the conversion. Not exactly cutting-edge technology, even by 1987 standards. But that didn't matter. They were going to cover it in so much custom bodywork that nobody would recognize the original truck anyway. The funny thing is that Kenworth cabovers were workhorses. These were trucks designed to haul freight across America, not fight crime or turn invisible. It's like taking a reliable family sedan and turning it into a spaceship. Sure, you can do it, but the sedan is probably confused about its life choices. Number 12. It packed a Detroit Diesel 8 V92. T-engine under all that custom bodywork beat the heart of a true working truck. The Detroit Diesel 8 V92. T-engine. This wasn't some exotic power plant. This was the diesel equivalent of a sledgehammer. Reliable, powerful, and about as subtle as the truck's appearance. The 8592T was a two-stroke diesel V8 that was ubiquitous in trucks of that era. Detroit Diesel made thousands of these things. They powered everything from city buses to fishing boats to, apparently, crime-fighting future trucks. The 92 refers to 92 cubic inches per cylinder, making this a 736 cubic inch monster. The two-stroke design meant it fired on every revolution, creating that distinctive Detroit diesel scream that truckers either loved or hated. There was no in-between. What's hilarious is that this very conventional engine was supposed to power all the truck's futuristic capabilities. The same engine hauling potatoes across Idaho was somehow enabling stealth mode and helicopter transformation, at least in the pilot episode's imagination. Some sources claim this engine was modified to produce 700 horsepower, which would be impressive if true. Stock, these engines made around 300 to 400 horsepower. But even 700 horsepower wouldn't be enough to make this aerodynamic disaster fast. You can put a rocket engine in a barn, but it's still shaped like a barn. Number 11. The build included an automatic transmission. Here's a detail that might not seem weird until you think about it. This truck had an automatic transmission. In 1987, most semi-trucks had manual transmissions with anywhere from 9 to 18 gears. But the Highwayman truck, automatic, like a minivan. This was actually a big deal for a TV vehicle. Can you imagine trying to film action scenes with an actor wrestling with a manual transmission? Okay, in this scene, you're chasing the bad guys while shifting through 13 gears and delivering important dialogue. The automatic transmission was probably a necessity for filming. The automatic made everything simpler for the actors and allowed for smoother action sequences. No grinding gears, no missed shifts, no stalling during crucial scenes. Just put it in drive and pretend you're piloting a spacecraft. It also fit the show's futuristic theme. In the late 80s, automatic transmissions in big trucks were seen as the future. They were wrong, manual transmissions dominated for decades more, but the thought was there. The automatic transmission probably made the truck even more of an oddball in the trucking world. Imagine pulling into a truck stop with your helicopter nose future truck with an automatic transmission. The other truckers wouldn't know whether to laugh or call the authorities. This mechanical choice perfectly encapsulates the show's approach. Take something practical, make it weird, call it futuristic. Number 10. Some sources claim 700 horsepower output. The power claims for this truck vary wildly depending on who you ask. Some sources insist the Detroit Diesel was modified to produce 700 horsepower. That's a serious number, especially for 1987. If true, this would make the Highwayman truck one of the most powerful semi-trucks on television. But let's think about this claim for a second. 700 horsepower from a Detroit 8.5? 92T would require serious modifications. We're talking about different turbochargers, modified injection systems, strengthened internals. That's not cheap or easy. And for what? It's not like they were actually racing this thing. The more likely scenario is that someone in marketing heard the engine could theoretically make 700 horsepower and ran with it. Our truck has 700 horsepower sounds way cooler than our truck has the same engine as a city bus. Even with 700 horsepower, this truck would still be slower than molasses going uphill. All that custom bodywork, the steel construction, the helicopter nose that destroyed any aerodynamics, it all added weight and drag. You could have 1,000 horsepower and this thing would still struggle to outrun a Volkswagen on the highway. But the 700 horsepower claim persists in truck mythology. It's part of the legend now. Whether it's true or not almost doesn't matter. In the world of TV vehicles, perception is reality, and this truck was perceived as powerful. Number 9. The body was built entirely from steel, not fiberglass. When you look at this truck's wild custom bodywork, you might assume it was made from fiberglass or some other lightweight material. That would be the smart choice for a TV prop. Fiberglass is easier to work with, cheaper to modify, and much lighter. But no, they built this thing from steel. Heavy, expensive, difficult to work with steel. According to auction listings and sales information, the entire custom body is steel construction. Every weird angle, every bizarre curve, every unnecessary aerodynamic element, all steel. This is like building a costume out of armor when everyone else is using cardboard. The amount of metalworking required for this project must have been staggering. You can't just bend steel into helicopter shapes easily. Every piece had to be cut, formed, welded, ground, and finished. The fabricators at John Ward Motorsports earned every penny of that $500,000 budget. The steel construction also meant this truck was incredibly heavy. A standard Kenworth cab-over was already heavy. Add hundreds of pounds of custom steel bodywork and you've got something that probably needed its own zip code. But the steel construction gave the truck a presence that fiberglass never could. This wasn't some flimsy prop that would fall apart after a few takes. This was a rolling fortress that could probably survive an actual apocalypse. 35 years later, the truck still exists because of that steel construction. Number 8. It drew heavy design inspiration from the Steinwinter supercargo. The Highwayman truck's bizarre, low-profile design wasn't completely original. It drew heavy inspiration from one of the weirdest concept trucks ever built, the Steinwinter supercargo. If you've never heard of it, Google it right now. Your brain will thank you for the confusion. The Steinwinter supercargo was a German concept truck from the early 80s that looked like someone squashed a regular truck with a giant hydraulic press. The cab was so low the driver practically lay down while driving. It looked like a truck designed by someone who had only heard descriptions of trucks but had never actually seen one. The Highwayman's designers apparently saw the Steinwinter and thought, yes, this is what American television needs. They took the super low cab concept, added their helicopter nose, threw in some crime-fighting equipment, and called it the future. The cab under design, where the cab sits lower than usual, is straight from the Steinwinter playbook. Both trucks challenge conventional truck design in ways that made traditional truckers question reality. The difference is, the Steinwinter was a serious attempt to revolutionize trucking efficiency. The Highwayman truck was a serious attempt to make people watch NBC on Friday nights. One was arguably more successful than the other, though neither really achieved their goals. It's fitting that a TV truck based on fighting crime in the future took inspiration from a concept truck that looked like it came from an alternate dimension where physics works differently. Number 7. It featured a battering ram. Front bumper. Because subtle wasn't in this show's vocabulary, they gave the truck a front bumper that could supposedly work as a battering ram, not a push bar. Not a bull bar. A battering ram. Like medieval castle storming equipment, but attached to a semi-truck. This wasn't just a visual element either. In the show, Highway would use this reinforced front bumper to smash through obstacles, ram bad guy vehicles, and generally solve problems through application of massive force. It was conflict resolution through tonnage. The bumper itself was this massive chunk of steel that looked like it could punch through a bank vault. It protruded from the helicopter nose like the universe's most aggressive unicorn horn. The whole assembly probably added another few hundred pounds to the front end. From an engineering perspective, this is hilarious. The truck already had the aerodynamics of a parachute, and they decided to add a giant flat surface to the front. At highway speeds, the wind resistance must have been incredible. The fuel economy was probably measured in gallons per mile, not miles per gallon. But it looked intimidating, which was the point. When this thing appeared in your rearview mirror with that battering ram pointed at your bumper, you moved over. Or you laughed at the absurdity. Either way, you noticed it, which was what mattered for television. Number 6. The side strakes were inspired by Ferrari Testarossa. In perhaps the most unlikely design mashup in automotive history, someone decided this truck needed styling elements from a Ferrari Testarossa. Yes, the Italian supercar famous for its distinctive side strakes, those horizontal slats that became the symbol of 1980s excess. They looked at a semi-truck and thought, you know what this needs? Ferrari styling. The strakes, those parallel horizontal lines running along the sides, were supposedly functional on the Testarossa, helping cool the side-mounted radiators. On the Highwayman truck, they were about as functional as the helicopter nose, but they sure looked, well, they looked like something. This is like putting a tuxedo on a bulldozer. Sure, you can do it, but the bulldozer isn't going to the opera, and everyone knows it. The Ferrari Testarossa was the epitome of 80s sports car design. The Highwayman truck was the epitome of 80s TV vehicle excess. Combining them created something that belonged in neither category. The fabricators had to create these strakes in steel, matching them to the truck's already bizarre proportions. It's one thing to put strakes on a low-slung Italian sports car. It's another thing entirely to scale them up for a vehicle that's 10 feet tall. The result was a truck that looked like it was trying way too hard to be cool, which, let's be honest, perfectly summarized the entire show. Number 5, after cancellation, they started converting it to an RV. The show lasted exactly 9 episodes before NBC pulled the plug, but the truck's story didn't end there. John Ward Motorsports, the company that built this monster, apparently decided to convert it into a recreational vehicle. Because if you're going to travel America, why not do it in a truck that looks like it escaped from a sci-fi asylum? According to reports, they started installing RV amenities inside the trailer. We're talking about a washer and dryer, a fireplace. Yes, a fireplace. In a truck that used to fight crime on television. They were literally turning a prop vehicle into someone's potential home on wheels. Think about the conversation that led to this decision. Hey, we've got this $500,000 TV truck that nobody wants anymore. What should we do with it? I don't know, maybe someone wants to go camping in a vehicle that looks like a helicopter, had a baby with a semi-truck. The RV conversion makes a weird kind of sense though. The trailer was already huge and mostly empty since it didn't actually need to carry crime-fighting equipment. The cab was already set up for long-distance driving, and if you're the type of person who would buy this truck, you're probably the type who doesn't mind pulling into KOA campgrounds looking like you're about to invade a small country. Whether they ever finish the RV conversion is unclear, but the idea itself is perfect. Nothing says relaxing vacation like driving a vehicle that costs more than most houses and gets 4 miles per gallon. Number 4, a mobile tattoo shop bought and preserved it. In one of the stranger twists in this truck's journey, it was eventually purchased by a business called Highwayman USA Inc., a mobile tattoo service. They bought a TV prop truck to give people tattoos. Let that sink in for a moment. This company apparently saw the Highwayman truck and thought, perfect for our mobile tattoo parlor. Because nothing says sterile medical procedure like getting inked in a truck that looks like it's about to transform into a robot. The mobile tattoo shop actually makes a bizarre kind of sense. The trailer was huge, providing plenty of space for tattoo stations. The truck's distinctive appearance would certainly attract attention at bike rallies and events. And the name Synergy was perfect. Highwayman truck, Highwayman tattoo shop. It writes itself. What's remarkable is that this tattoo shop ownership probably saved the truck from being scrapped. They preserved it, maintained it, and kept it running when it could have easily ended up in a junkyard. This $500,000 piece of television history survived because someone wanted a really conspicuous mobile tattoo parlor. Imagine being at Sturgis or Daytona Bike Week and seeing this thing roll up. You'd either run away in fear or immediately get in line for a tattoo. There's no middle ground with a vehicle this absurd. The tattoo shop phase of the truck's life is probably the most practical use it ever had. Number 3, the entire build happened for just 9 episodes. Here's the fact that should make every TV executive cry. They spent up to $500,000 building this truck for a show that lasted exactly 9 episodes. 9, not 9. Seasons, not 90 episodes, 9 episodes total. That breaks down to over $55,000 per episode just for the truck. To put this in perspective, entire TV shows have been produced for less than what they spent on this one vehicle. The show premiered in March 1988 and was canceled by May 1988. They barely made it through spring. The truck had a longer build time than the show had airtime. John Ward Motorsports probably spent months creating this thing. The show lasted weeks. By the time they finished all the custom work, learned how to film with it, and got it camera ready, the show was already on life support. NBC executives must have had some interesting meetings when those ratings came in. So, about that $500,000 truck we commissioned, the one for the hit show that's going to run for years, about that. This might be the worst return on investment in television vehicle history. At least the Batmobile got used in a movie and a full TV series. Even Kit lasted for 4 seasons. The Highwayman truck got 9 episodes and then became a very expensive conversation piece. Number 2, multiple failed attempts to sell it as movie memorabilia. After the show's cancellation, the truck entered the strange purgatory of TV vehicle afterlife. It's been offered for sale multiple times over the decades, marketed as movie memorabilia, a production prop, or a collector's item. The problem is, it's memorabilia from a show nobody remembers. The various sale attempts tell a story of gradually lowering expectations. Early listings probably emphasize the truck's TV heritage and unique design. Later ones focus more on the craftsmanship and build cost. Eventually, they were probably just hoping someone with too much money and questionable taste would take it off their hands. The truck has appeared at auction houses, on specialized vehicle sales sites, and in classified ads. Each time, the sellers have to explain what the Highwayman was, why this truck mattered, and why someone should pay serious money for a prop from a failed show. It's like trying to sell memorabilia from a band that had one song that peaked at number 97 on the charts. Sure, it's unique, but unique doesn't always mean valuable. The asking prices have varied wildly over the years, probably depending on how desperate the current owner was to get rid of it. The truck is simultaneously priceless as a piece of TV history and worthless as a practical vehicle. It exists in this weird zone where it's too famous to scrap, but too obscure to sell for what it costs to build. Number 1, it was designed for a future that never happened. The weirdest fact about the Highwayman truck is that it was designed to represent the near future of 1992. The show's creators genuinely thought this is what vehicles would look like in 5 years. Helicopter noses, stealth technology, and Ferrari strakes on semi-trucks. This was their vision of tomorrow. The show premiered in 1988, set in 1992, and portrayed a world where the highways were so dangerous that we needed militarized super trucks to patrol them. The actual 1992 gave us the Ford Explorer and Dodge Viper. Not exactly the same vision. This truck represents a fascinating moment in 1980s futurism. It's what happens when TV producers, automotive designers, and probably significant amounts of cocaine try to predict the future. They looked at Knight Rider's success and thought, but what if the car was huge and could fly? The irony is that the actual future of trucking went in the completely opposite direction. Instead of helicopter noses and battering rams, we got better fuel efficiency and safety features. Instead of stealth modes, we got GPS tracking. Instead of hidden sports cars, we got better sleeping compartments for drivers. The Highwayman truck is a monument to failed futurism. It's a $500,000 reminder that predicting the future is hard, and building TV vehicles based on those predictions is expensive. But it's also kind of beautiful in its absurdity. Someone had a completely insane vision and actually built it, in steel, for 9 episodes of television that barely anyone watched. And there you have it, 20 absolutely bizarre facts about a truck that shouldn't exist but somehow does. The Highwayman truck remains one of television's most expensive, most ridiculous, and most forgotten vehicles. It's a perfect time capsule of 1980s excess, terrible predictions about the future, and what happens when TV executives have more money than sense. Did you know about this show before today? Had you ever seen this magnificent monstrosity rolling down the highway of failed TV history? Let us know in the comments below. And hey, if you enjoyed this deep dive into television's weird vehicle vault, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. We've got plenty more forgotten TV oddities where this came from. Thanks for riding along on this strange journey down memory lane, and we'll see you next time when we explore another piece of television history that probably shouldn't exist, but thankfully does. Number 20. The Batmobile was built on a stretch 1959 Chevrolet Impala chassis. Yes, really, beneath all that intimidating Gothic armor and jet black mystique lies the bones of a classic American family car. Designer Anton Furst and his team took a standard Impala, stretched it to nearly 20 feet long, and then basically went insane with the bodywork. The Impala's V8 engine was kept but heavily modified. They reinforced the frame to handle all the extra weight from the custom body panels. It's like putting a tuxedo on a golden retriever, except the golden retriever breathes fire and fights crime. The chassis had to be stretched so much that it created handling problems during filming. The car could barely make turns without a 3-point maneuver. Director Tim Burton didn't care. He wanted presence over practicality. And honestly, when you see this thing rolling through Gotham streets, the last thing you're thinking about is its turning radius. The modification process took months. They had to custom fabricate mounting points for all the gadgets and armor. The original Impala weighed about 3,500 pounds. The finished Batmobile, nearly 3 tons. That poor Chevy suspension was basically crying for mercy every time they drove it. Number 19, Michael Keaton's Batman cowl had to be redesigned with shorter ears specifically because of the Batmobile. This is peak Hollywood problem solving. The original Batman costume had these tall, dramatic bat ears that looked perfect in publicity shots. Then someone tried to put Keaton in the car. The sliding canopy wouldn't clear the ears. Every time they closed the cockpit, Batman's ears would get caught. Imagine being on set, watching Batman repeatedly bonk his head trying to get into his own car. The costume department had to create an entirely new cowl just for driving scenes. They called it the driving cowl. Creative, right? The shorter ears changed Batman's whole silhouette when he was in the vehicle. If you watch the movie carefully, you can actually spot the difference between standing Batman and driving Batman. It's subtle, but it's there. This wasn't a cheap fix either. Each cowl cost thousands of dollars to produce, and they needed multiple versions for stunts and backups. All because someone didn't think to measure the cockpit clearance before designing the costume. Burton apparently found the whole situation hilarious. Here's this intimidating vigilante who strikes fear into criminals' hearts, defeated by his own ears. Number 18. The Batmobile's jet engine intake used actual parts from a Rolls-Royce jet engine. not replicas, not props, real jet engine components. The production team somehow acquired parts from a decommissioned Rolls-Royce turbine and integrated them into the front nose cone. This wasn't just for show either. The intake actually functioned as part of the car's cooling system. Air would flow through those jet parts to help cool the actual Chevy engine underneath. It's completely unnecessary and completely brilliant. The parts alone cost more than most people's entire cars, but Burton wanted authenticity in his absurdity. When you looked at that intake, you were looking at genuine aerospace engineering. The irony is that most viewers had no idea. They assumed it was just movie magic. Nope, that's real British jet technology bolted onto an American muscle car chassis, dressed up as a vigilante's ride. The insurance company apparently had a minor heart attack when they found out. Genuine jet parts on a stunt vehicle? That's a liability nightmare, but the effect was worth it. When that intake caught the light, it looked like it could actually achieve takeoff. Number 17. The turbine blades visible in the nose cone came from a British Harrier jump jet. Specifically, a decommissioned Sea Harrier that had seen actual combat service. The production designer tracked down these parts through military surplus channels. These weren't just any turbine blades, these were from the compressor section of a Pegasus engine. The same engine that allowed Harriers to hover and take off vertically. They had to be specially mounted and balanced to spin freely when the car moved. The effect made it look like the Batmobile had a functioning jet turbine, which, to be clear, it absolutely did not. But the illusion was perfect. The blades would spin from the airflow as the car drove, creating this mesmerizing visual that screamed, "This thing means business." The Harrier connection wasn't random either. Burton loved the idea of military-grade technology being repurposed for vigilante justice. It fit perfectly with Batman's character, a man using tools of war for his personal crusade. Plus, British aerospace parts on an American car for a Hollywood movie. That's globalization before globalization was cool. The blades had to be polished and treated to prevent rust. Someone's job on set was literally Harrier blade maintenance technician. Number 16. The sliding canopy operated like a fighter jet cockpit instead of using regular doors. No handles, no hinges, just a massive piece of curved glass and metal that slid forward on hydraulic rails. This created immediate problems. First, if the hydraulics failed, you were trapped. They had to install an emergency manual release that took 2 people to operate. Second, you couldn't just hop in quickly. Every entrance and exit was a production. The canopy took about 15 seconds to fully open or close. Doesn't sound like much until you're trying to do multiple takes. The mechanism was so complex that they had a dedicated technician just for canopy operation. One person's entire job was making sure Batman could get in and out of his car. The hydraulic system was powered by the car's engine, which meant the engine had to be running to operate the canopy. Park with the engine off. Hope you weren't planning on getting out. They eventually added a backup electric motor, but it was even slower. 25 seconds to freedom. Rain was the enemy. Water would get into the hydraulic lines and cause stuttering. Nothing says Dark Knight like a canopy that opens in jerky, comedic spurts. Number 15. Many of the Batmobile's on-screen gadgets were actually functional. The oil slick dispensers? Real. They actually sprayed oil onto the road. The smoke emitters? Fully operational. They could fill an entire street with smoke in seconds. The machine guns? They fired blanks, but they were real. Modified Browning M1919s. Even the grappling hook launcher worked, though not as dramatically as shown on film. It could fire a cable about 30 feet. The bomb dispensers were functional too, dropping foam spheres that looked convincing on camera. Each gadget had its own control system in the cockpit. The dashboard looked like a fighter jet had a baby with a disco mixing board. Switches everywhere. The actors had to memorize which switch did what. Hit the wrong one during filming, and suddenly you're laying down an oil slick when you meant to activate the afterburner. Testing these gadgets was apparently hilarious. Imagine Warner Brothers executives watching grown adults play with a car that shoots oil and drops fake bombs. The cleanup crew hated the oil slick feature. That stuff was nearly impossible to clean off the road. Several Gotham street scenes had to be reshot because of visible oil stains from previous takes. Number 14. The afterburner actually shot real flames out the back. Not CGI, not clever camera tricks, actual fire. A propane system was installed that could shoot flames up to 6 feet behind the car. The effect was achieved using a modified flamethrower system typically used for agricultural burning. Yes, the Batmobile was part sports car, part farm equipment. The flame system had its own separate fuel tank and ignition system. Safety regulations required a fire marshal on set whenever they used it. The Actors Guild also required special hazard pay for anyone near the car during flame sequences. The heat was intense enough to melt plastic and blister paint. They accidentally scorched a few set pieces during filming. The flame couldn't be used continuously. About 10 seconds max before things got dangerous. The propane system added another 300 pounds to the already overweight vehicle, but the visual impact was undeniable. When that afterburner kicked in, everyone on set stopped what they were doing to watch. Tim Burton supposedly giggled like a child every time they fired it up. Here's this serious, gothic director, absolutely delighted by his fire-breathing car. Number 13. The Batmobile could transform into cocoon mode with armor plating. This wasn't just a visual effect, the car had actual armor panels that could extend and retract. The mechanism used a complex system of hydraulic arms and servo motors. It took about 45 seconds for the full transformation. Way too slow for the movie, so they sped it up in editing. The armor added another 800 pounds when fully deployed. The car could barely move in this configuration. It was basically a very expensive, very gothic paperweight. Each armor panel had to be individually calibrated and balanced. One misaligned panel and the whole system would jam. They had 3 complete armor sets built, 1 for the hero car, 2 for backups. The cost? About $50,000 per set in 1989 money. The cocoon mode was supposed to be used more in the film, but the mechanism kept breaking. They only got about 5 good takes before giving up and using miniatures for some shots. The armor was made from a combination of fiberglass and aluminum, strong enough to look convincing, light enough to actually work. The transformation sequence required 12 different technicians to reset between takes. Number 12. The grappling hook system could actually fire and retract. The hook itself was a custom-machined piece of steel weighing about 15 pounds. It was fired using compressed air at roughly 60 psi. The cable was aircraft-grade steel rated for 2,000 pounds of tension. In the movie, it helps the car make impossible turns. In reality, it could barely support its own weight. The launcher was mounted on a swivel that could aim 30 degrees in any direction. The aiming was controlled from inside the cockpit via a small joystick. Very 1980s, the retraction system was the real problem. It used an electric winch that sounded like a dying cat. They had to dub over the sound in post-production. The cable had to be carefully coiled between each use. One kink or twist and the whole system would jam. They went through 6 grappling hooks during production, not because they broke, but because they kept losing them. Imagine explaining that insurance claim. The hook could theoretically support the car's weight, but nobody was brave enough to test it. The stunt coordinator took one look at the setup and said, absolutely not. Number 11. The Bat Missile mode would shed entire body panels to fit through tight spaces. This was a one-shot deal. Once you activated it, those panels were gone. The panels were held on with explosive bolts similar to what NASA uses. When triggered, small charges would blow the bolts and panels would fly off. The remaining vehicle was basically a skeletal frame with wheels. It looked like someone had peeled a Batman car like a banana. The transformation destroyed about $60,000 worth of custom bodywork, every single time. They only did it twice during filming. Once for the actual shot, once for safety testing. The stripped-down version could allegedly fit through a space just 7 feet wide. The normal Batmobile needed at least 12 feet. The mode also reconfigured the wheel alignment, bringing them closer to the center line. This was achieved through a complex pivoting axle system that took months to engineer, and worked exactly once without breaking. The entire sequence lasted about 3 seconds on screen. 3 seconds that cost roughly $120,000 to film. Burton insisted it was worth every penny. Number 10. Hidden Browning machine guns were mounted under the front fenders. These weren't props, they were real decommissioned military weapons modified to fire blanks. Each gun weighed about 30 pounds and was mounted on a reinforced steel frame. The mounting system allowed them to extend and retract on command. When hidden, you'd never know they were there. When deployed, they looked absolutely lethal. The guns were connected to a compressed air system that simulated recoil. When fired, the whole car would shake slightly. Very subtle, very effective. The blank cartridges they used were specially made for the production. Standard blanks were too loud and created too much smoke. These were Hollywood blanks, all flash, less bang. The guns had a fire rate of about 300 rounds per minute. In the film, they appear to fire much faster. That's movie magic and sound design. The ATF had to inspect and approve the weapons before filming. There was a federal agent on set whenever the guns were used. Your tax dollars at work making sure Batman's car guns were legal. The mechanism to deploy the guns was incredibly complex. 17 moving parts per gun. If one piece failed, the whole system locked up. Number 9, the Batmobile could fire bat discs from side-mounted launchers. These launchers were built into the rear wheel wells. The discs themselves were foam props painted to look metallic. In the movie, they're supposedly razor-sharp projectiles. In reality, you could play frisbee with them. The launching mechanism used compressed air, similar to a t-shirt cannon. They could fire discs about 50 feet with reasonable accuracy. Well, reasonable being a relative term. They hit their target maybe 40% of the time. Each launcher held 6 discs. Reloading took about 5 minutes and required partial disassembly of the wheel well. Not exactly combat ready. The discs had to be perfectly balanced or they'd wobble in flight. Props team member spent hours weighing and adjusting each disc. That was someone's actual job. Disc balancer. The launchers were aimed using a small screen in the cockpit showing a camera feed. 1989 technology, so the image quality was terrible. It was like aiming through a Game Boy screen. They made about 200 discs for the production. By the end of filming, they could only find 12. The rest are presumably in someone's garage, the world's most expensive coasters. Number 8, chassis-mounted shin breakers were designed to damage anyone trying to carjack the vehicle. These were essentially metal spikes that extended from the lower chassis. The idea was that anyone trying to slide under or get too close would get a nasty surprise. They extended about 6 inches and were sharp enough to puncture tires, or shins, hence the name. The mechanism was spring-loaded and could deploy in less than a second. Retracting them took considerably longer and required manual intervention. The shin breakers were Burton's idea. He wanted the car to feel dangerous, even when parked. Mission accomplished. They were never actually used in the film. The studio's legal department had a collective anxiety attack when they found out about them. But they remained on the car throughout production. Several crew members learned about them the hard way. The production's first aid kit got a lot of use. The spikes were eventually dulled for safety, but they still looked menacing. The deployment switch was unmarked in the cockpit. Keaton accidentally activated them once during a dialogue scene. The sound of spring-loaded spikes shooting out isn't easy to edit around. Number 7. The cockpit interior was styled like a fighter jet with advanced 1980s technology. Advanced being a relative term here, we're talking about CD players and voice recognition that worked about half the time. The dashboard had over 70 individual switches and buttons. Each one was labeled with tiny, almost impossible to read text. The producers wanted it to look complex. They succeeded, maybe too well. The passenger monitor was a 5-inch CRT screen that weighed 12 pounds. It displayed a whopping 240 lines of resolution. You could barely make out shapes, let alone details. The voice recognition system was revolutionary for 1989. It could recognize about 20 commands, if you spoke slowly and clearly, and the engine wasn't running. The CD recorder was particularly amusing. This was when CDs were still exotic technology. The Batmobile had a recorder that could burn custom CDs, in theory. In practice, it never worked, not once. The vibration from driving made recording impossible. The self-diagnostic system was real though. It could monitor engine temperature, oil pressure, and fuel levels. It displayed this information on a tiny LCD screen that would wash out in sunlight. The entire cockpit was a nightmare to operate. Keaton had a cheat sheet taped just out of camera view. Number 6. The gas turbine consumed fuel so rapidly it could only run for 15 seconds at a time. This wasn't the actual engine, mind you. This was a separate turbine installed just for the sound and visual effect. It burned through a gallon of fuel in those 15 seconds. That's 240 gallons per hour if it could run continuously, which it couldn't because it would literally melt itself. The turbine was a modified helicopter APU, auxiliary power unit. It produced an absolutely glorious sound but served no practical purpose. It didn't power anything. It didn't propel the car. It just looked and sounded amazing. The heat it generated was intense. They had to install additional cooling vents just to prevent the surrounding bodywork from warping. Even then, they could only run it in short bursts. The fuel tank for the turbine held 3 gallons. That's 3 takes before refueling. And refueling meant waiting for everything to cool down first. About 20 minutes between runs, the turbine starting sequence was incredibly dramatic. It would whine, building up to a screaming crescendo. Everyone on set would stop to watch. Then 15 seconds later, it would wind down like a disappointed party favor. The fuel bill for the turbine alone was thousands of dollars, for maybe 10 minutes of total screen time. Number 5. The design was heavily influenced by Art Deco architecture. Burton wanted the car to look like it could park next to his gothic Gotham buildings and fit right in. The elongated nose, the fin-like wings, the vertical lines, all classic Art Deco elements. The designer studied 1930s architecture and automotive design. Buildings like the Chrysler Building were direct inspirations. You can see it in the stepped ridges along the body. The car's silhouette was meant to echo Gotham's skyline. Those dramatic fins aren't just for show, they mirror the city's Gothic spires. Burton was obsessive about this. He'd compare photos of the car next to concept art of buildings, making sure they felt cohesive. The black paint wasn't just any black either. They tested 17 different shades before finding one that matched Burton's vision. It had to absorb light in a specific way, creating shadows that emphasized the Art Deco lines. The interior continued the theme. The seats were designed to look like miniature architectural elements. Even the steering wheel had Art Deco patterns etched into it. You'd never see these on camera, but Burton insisted on the details. This aesthetic obsession added weeks to the design process, and tens of thousands to the budget. Number 4, the Batmobile used incredibly eclectic parts from various vehicles. The fuel cap came from a London double-decker bus. Because nothing says dark night like British public transportation, the headlights were yanked from a Honda Civic, the most practical car in the world, donated its eyes to the most impractical. The taillights came from a Ferrari. At least those made some sense. Both are expensive and impractical. The side mirrors were from a Rolls-Royce. The windshield wipers from a Mercedes. The wheels were custom-made but based on a Corvette design. This wasn't intentional eclecticism, it was problem-solving with whatever parts fit. The London bus fuel cap was chosen because it was big enough to handle the fuel system's flow rate. Plus, it had a satisfying mechanical action when opened. The Honda headlights were perfect for the narrow front-end design. They were also cheap to replace when stunt work destroyed them, which happened a lot. Finding replacement parts was a nightmare. Imagine calling a Honda dealer to order headlights for the Batmobile. The parts manifest for the car reads like an automotive United Nations. British, Italian, German, Japanese, and American components all working together. Number 3, the car's finish changed from matte to gloss between Batman and Batman Returns. This wasn't just a simple repaint, the entire surface treatment process was different. The matte finish in the first film was achieved using a special flat black paint that cost $800 per gallon. It absorbed light, making the car look like a shadow. But it was incredibly fragile. Fingerprints would show, rain would leave spots. They had to handle it with gloves. For Batman Returns, they switched to a glossy finish. This required completely stripping the original paint, treating the surface, and applying 12 coats of high-gloss black. The process took 3 weeks per car. The glossy version was more practical but less menacing. It reflected light, making the car more visible but less mysterious. Burton initially hated it. He thought it looked too showroom. But the gloss had advantages. It was easier to maintain, it photographed better under certain lighting conditions, and it didn't show every single touch. The paint job for Batman Returns cost $40,000 for black paint on a car that would mostly be filmed at night. But the difference is noticeable if you know what to look for. The matte version looks like it absorbs souls. The glossy one looks like it means business. Number 2, multiple Batmobiles were built for production. 2 fully functional driving versions for filming. 3 additional shells for promotion and display, each one slightly different. The hero car had all the working gadgets. The stunt car was reinforced but had fewer functional features. It was basically a battering ram shaped like the Batmobile. Building each car took approximately 4 months. The hero car alone cost $300,000 in 1989 money. That's about $700,000 today for one car. That barely turns. The promotional cars were cheaper but still expensive, about $100,000 each. They had no engines but looked perfect for photos. These were sent around the world for premieres and exhibitions. Keeping track of which car was where became someone's full-time job. The Batmobile logistics coordinator. Imagine that on a resume. Each car had different quirks. The hero car's canopy was smooth, the stunt cars would stick halfway. One promotional car's left wheel was slightly off-center, only noticeable if you knew to look for it. By the end of production, only one fully functional car remained. The others had been beaten into submission by stunts and mechanical failures. That surviving car is now worth millions. The others are in various states of repair in private collections and museums. Number 1, the Batmobile from Batman '89 is actually displayed in the Smithsonian. Not a replica, the actual hero car from the film. It sits in the National Museum of American History. recognized as a legitimate piece of American cultural heritage. This is the same institution that houses the Star-Spangled Banner and Abraham Lincoln's top hat. And now, a heavily modified Chevy Impala dressed as a vigilante's ride. The Smithsonian acquired it in 2012. The car had to be partially disassembled to fit through the museum's doors. Reassembling it inside took a team of specialists 3 days. It's displayed in a climate-controlled environment to preserve the paint and materials. The temperature is maintained at exactly 68 degrees Fahrenheit, humidity at 45%. The car is regularly maintained by museum conservators. They treat it with the same care as centuries-old artifacts, because technically, that's what it is now, an artifact. Visitors can walk completely around it, but can't touch it. Security cameras watch it 24/7. There's literally a panic button specifically for Batmobile-related emergencies. The museum had to reinforce the floor beneath it. 3 tons of Bat vehicle required special structural support. The display includes information about its construction and cultural impact. Academic papers have been written about its design influence. The Batmobile officially has scholarly citations. School groups take field trips specifically to see it. Teachers use it to discuss American filmmaking, design, and popular culture. The car that couldn't turn properly is now a national treasure. And there you have it. That's 20 absolutely bizarre facts about the Batmobile from Tim Burton's 1989 Batman. From its Chevy Impala bones to its place in the Smithsonian, this car is even stranger than Gotham itself. Did any of these facts surprise you? Let us know in the comments below which one blew your mind the most. And hey, if you enjoyed this deep dive into Batman's most iconic ride, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fascinating breakdowns of movie history's most legendary vehicles. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Number 20, the EM50 was built from a GMC motorhome, chosen for its aerodynamic shape and spacious interior. When the Stripes production team needed to create their fictional military vehicle, they didn't start with an actual military transport. No, they went shopping at RV dealerships. The base for the EM50 urban assault vehicle was a 1976 GMC motorhome. You know, the kind of vehicle retired couples take to Yellowstone, not into combat zones. The GMC motorhome was actually a pretty revolutionary RV for its time. It had front-wheel drive, which was unusual for something that size. It had an Oldsmobile Tornado drivetrain, and most importantly for the film, it had this sleek, futuristic body that already looked vaguely military if you squinted hard enough and had maybe 3 beers in you. Director Ivan Reitman specifically chose this model because of its distinctive shape. The thing already looked like it came from the future with its smooth, curved fiberglass body. Most RVs back then were basically boxes on wheels, but the GMC had these flowing lines that made it look fast even when it was parked. Of course, looking fast and actually being fast were 2 completely different things, which the stunt drivers would discover pretty quickly. The spacious interior was another selling point. They needed room for all those fake control panels, weapon racks, and space for Bill Murray and Harold Ramis to bounce around during action scenes. The GMC motorhome had 23 feet of interior space to work with. That's a lot of room for comedy hijinks. The production bought 3 identical GMC motorhomes for the film. One for the hero shots, one for stunts, and one for backup because, well, when you're turning luxury RVs into assault vehicles, things tend to break. Number 19. The production team added faux armor panels that were lightweight plywood, not metal. Here's where movie magic really starts to show its cheap side. All that. Intimidating armor plating that made the EM50 look like it could withstand enemy fire. Pure plywood, folks, not steel, not aluminum, not even thick plywood. We're talking about 1/4-inch sheets that you could punch through if you really wanted to ruin the illusion. The art department had to get creative with making wood look like military-grade armor. They used a technique called scoring, where they carved fake weld lines and bolt patterns into the plywood. Then they painted everything with this special textured paint that had sand mixed into it. From more than 5 feet away, it actually looked pretty convincing. Get any closer though, and you could see the wood grain showing through in places. Weight was the biggest concern. The GMC motorhome already weighed about 13,000 pounds empty. Add real armor plating and you're looking at something that wouldn't move without a tank engine. The plywood panels added maybe 300 pounds total to the vehicle. That's less than having 2 extra passengers. They attached these panels using basic wood screws and construction adhesive. Some panels were actually held on with heavy-duty Velcro, so they could be quickly removed between shots for maintenance. The funniest part? During one scene where the EM50 supposedly crashes through a barrier, they had to replace the front armor panels 3 times because the plywood kept splitting on impact. The props department eventually started keeping a stack of pre-painted replacement panels on hand. They went through about 40 sheets of plywood during the entire production. That's enough to build a decent-sized shed, which is basically what they did. They built a shed on wheels and called it an urban assault vehicle. Number 18. The rooftop turret and side guns never fired. They were props with electric swivels. Only every good assault vehicle needs some serious firepower, right? Well, the EM50's weapons were about as dangerous as a super soaker. That menacing rooftop turret that looked like it could take down a helicopter? It was made from PVC pipe, an old barbecue grill housing, and parts from a junked washing machine. The whole thing was powered by a windshield wiper motor from a '67 Chevy. The side-mounted guns were even more ridiculous. They used modified aluminum baseball bats as the barrels. The production team bought them from a sporting goods store, spray-painted them black, and attached them to electric motors salvaged from old garage door openers. When you see those guns swiveling menacingly in the movie, they're being controlled by a props guy hiding inside with a jury-rigged joystick made from arcade game parts. The ammunition belts you see feeding into these weapons were actually bicycle chains painted brass color. They bought about 200 feet of bike chain from various shops around Los Angeles. The shell casings that appear to be loaded in the weapons were empty. CO2 cartridges collected from the craft services department's soda machine. They glued them to the bike chains to create the illusion of serious ammunition. Here's the really weird part. They actually had to add speakers inside the turret housing to make mechanical sounds because the windshield wiper motor was too quiet. They recorded the sound of an electric can opener and played it on a loop whenever the turret moved. So every time you see that turret tracking a target in the movie, you're actually hearing someone's kitchen appliance. The side guns made a clicking sound that was actually a recording of a ratchet wrench played through tiny speakers hidden in the mounting brackets. Number 17. Armor skirts hid the RV's standard wheels to give it a military-grade silhouette. One of the biggest giveaways that your military vehicle is actually a motorhome would be those distinctly civilian wheels and tires. The EM50's designers solved this problem by building armor skirts that hung down to about 4 inches from the ground, completely hiding the GMC's standard Alcoa aluminum wheels and Michelin tires. These skirts were engineering nightmares. They had to be rigid enough to look like armor, but flexible enough to move when the vehicle hit bumps. The solution? They built them in sections connected by heavy-duty door hinges painted olive drab. Each section was about 3 feet wide, and they'd flex independently when the vehicle moved. From the outside, you couldn't see the hinges, but from underneath, it looked like a really aggressive accordion. The skirts caused massive problems during filming. They'd scrape on every slight incline or speed bump. The sound department hated them because they made this horrible grinding noise whenever the vehicle turned. They went through about 15 sets of skirts during production because they kept getting torn off during driving scenes. The props department eventually started making them from corrugated plastic instead of plywood because it was cheaper to replace. The rear wheel skirts were even worse. They had to accommodate the dual rear wheels of the motorhome, so they stuck out further. This made the vehicle about 8 inches wider than it legally should have been for street driving. They actually got pulled over by California Highway Patrol twice during filming on public roads. The production had to get special wide load permits for any scenes shot outside the studio lot. The best part? In several scenes, if you look carefully, you can actually see the real tires peeking out underneath when the vehicle goes over bumps. They just hoped nobody would notice. Spoiler alert, people noticed. Number 16. Despite its assault label, the real engine was a stock 455 Oldsmobile Vol 8 with modest output. For something called an urban assault vehicle, you'd expect some serious horsepower under the hood. What the EM50 actually had was the same engine your uncle's 1976 Oldsmobile. 98 probably had a 455 cubic inch V8 that wheezed out about 230 horsepower on a good day, and that was before they added all the fake armor and equipment. This engine was designed for comfort cruising, not combat maneuvers. It had a 2-barrel carburetor that was tuned for fuel economy, not performance. The thing got about 8 miles per gallon normally, but with all the added weight and the constant stop and start of filming, they were lucky to get 5. The production went through about 1,200 gallons of gas during filming. The fuel budget alone was $15,000. The transmission was a 3-speed turbo Hydromatic 425, which was bulletproof reliable, but about as exciting as watching paint dry. First gear was so low that the vehicle's top speed in first was about 15 miles per hour. This actually helped during action scenes because it made everything look faster than it really was. When you see the EM50 racing through streets in the movie, it's usually going about 25 miles per hour tops. The engine overheated constantly. All that extra plywood blocked airflow to the radiator. They had to install 2 additional electric fans just to keep it from boiling over during long takes. Between shots, they'd have crew members standing by with portable fans pointed at the engine compartment. They went through 3 water pumps and 2 radiators during production. The mechanics on set joked that the real assault was on the cooling system. By the end of filming, the engine was so worn out that it would diesel for about 30 seconds after being shut off, coughing and sputtering like it was dying. Number 15. The film added retractable weapon racks that slid out on rails powered by stagehands off camera. Those cool sliding weapon racks that emerge from the sides of the EM50 like something from a James Bond film. Pure manual labor, baby. No hydraulics, no motors, just good old-fashioned stagehands pulling ropes like they were operating a medieval drawbridge. The racks themselves were built from electrical conduit welded into frames. They rode on drawer slides, the same kind you'd find in your kitchen cabinets, just heavy-duty industrial versions. The production bought them from a restaurant supply company that usually sold them for commercial refrigerators. Each rack could hold about 50 pounds of fake weapons, which sounds impressive until you realize the weapons were mostly rubber and plastic replicas that weighed about 2 pounds each. The rope system was hilariously complicated. They had to drill holes through the actual RV's floor and run aircraft cable underneath. The cables connected to pulleys mounted under the chassis, which then ran to handles where stagehands could hide just out of camera view. It took 2 people per rack to operate them smoothly, 1 to pull them out, 1 to control the speed so they didn't slam open. During one take, a stagehand pulled too hard and ripped an entire rack off its rails. It went flying about 10 feet and nearly hit Harold Ramis. The timing of these racks opening had to be perfect for each shot. They actually had a choreographer just for the weapon rack sequences. He'd stand behind the camera with a whistle, giving signals to the rope pullers. Tweet meant pull, 2 tweets meant stop, 3 tweets meant something went wrong and reset everything. The crew called him the Rack Maestro. In the final film, they added mechanical sound effects in post-production to make it seem like the racks were motor-driven. The actual sound on set was just squeaking metal and grunting stagehands. Number 14. The smokescreen effect came from theatrical smoke machines plumbed under the chassis. That impressive smokescreen, the EM50, deploys to confuse enemies. It's the same technology used in haunted houses and rock concerts. The production team bought 6 theatrical fog machines from a special effects supplier in Hollywood and jerry-rigged them under the vehicle's chassis using PVC pipe and metal brackets. The installation was a complete nightmare. They had to run separate power lines from the RV's electrical system to each fog machine. The machines used a glycol-based fog juice that cost about $40 per gallon. During the smokescreen scenes, they'd burn through about 10 gallons in just 3 minutes. The fog had this sweet, slightly chemical smell that made everyone on set slightly nauseous after long exposure. Several crew members claimed they got headaches from it. The fog machines had to be triggered manually from inside the vehicle. They installed a control panel that looked high-tech but was actually just 6 household light switches mounted in a Radio Shack project box. Each switch controlled 1 fog machine. The operator had to flip them in sequence to create the right smoke pattern. If you fired them all at once, the fog would be too thick and you couldn't see anything for the shot. Here's the really weird part. The fog was heavier than air, so it would pool around the vehicle instead of dispersing like real military smoke. They had to use industrial fans just out of frame to blow the fog where they wanted it. In one scene, they had 12 fans running simultaneously. The noise was so loud they couldn't record dialogue and had to dub everything in post-production. The fog also left this oily residue on everything. After each smoke scene, they had to wash the entire vehicle and the surrounding pavement. The studio lot's maintenance crew banned them from using the smoke machines near any buildings after fog seeped into an office ventilation system and triggered a fire alarm. Number 13, the high-tech lenses were repurposed camera housings painted matte black. All those sophisticated-looking sensors and targeting systems bristling from the EM50's hull, most of them were empty camera housings from broken or obsolete film equipment. The props department raided equipment rental houses and bought their junk bins for pennies on the dollar. They had old Bolex 16mm camera bodies, broken Nikon lens housings, and even a couple of damaged telescope parts from a local astronomy shop. Everything got spray painted matte black to look uniform and military. They'd attach red or green LEDs inside some of them, powered by 9-volt batteries. The LEDs would blink randomly. There was no pattern or meaning to it, just random blinking to look technological. The large main sensor on the front was actually the housing from a broken television studio camera from the 1960s. It was huge, about the size of a microwave oven. They gutted it completely and installed a disco ball motor inside to make the lens rotate slowly. The lens itself wasn't even glass. It was a clear plastic salad bowl from the craft services table, painted with transparent blue paint to give it that high-tech tinted look. The infrared sensors were the best scam of all. They were toilet paper tubes wrapped in black electrical tape with calculator screens glued to the ends. From more than 3 feet away, they looked exactly like expensive military hardware. The production made about 40 of these fake sensors for $5 each. Real military sensors would have cost thousands per unit. During night scenes, they'd put glow sticks inside some of the tubes to create an eerie green glow. The glow sticks only lasted about 4 hours, so they went through boxes of them. After filming wrapped, the props department tried to return some of the camera housings to the rental houses, but most were so damaged from drilling and painting that they just threw them away. Number 12. The front ram was bolted wood and fiberglass to avoid damage to filming locations. That menacing battering ram on the front of the EM50 that could supposedly punch through barriers and gates. It was about as solid as a movie prop wall, which is to say not solid at all. The ram was built from 2x4 lumber frames covered with thin fiberglass sheets, the kind used for shower stalls. The construction was deliberately flimsy for a very practical reason: insurance. The production's insurance company freaked out when they heard about plans for a vehicle with a battering ram. They imagined lawsuits from damaged buildings and injured stunt performers. The compromise was a ram that would crumble on impact rather than actually ram anything. It was basically a crumple zone made of Home Depot materials. They went through 7 rams during filming. Every time the EM50 hit something, even lightly, the ram would need repairs or replacement. The props team got so good at building them that they could construct a new ram in about 2 hours. They'd pre-build the wooden frames and keep sheets of fiberglass ready to go. The painting process was down to a science: primer, olive drab base coat, weathering with black paint, and fake rust around the bolts. The mounting system was intentionally weak. They used aluminum brackets that would bend before transferring any real force to the vehicle's frame. During the scene where the EM50 breaks through a checkpoint barrier, the ram actually fell off completely on the first take. They had to reshoot with a new ram attached with stronger brackets, but still designed to break away if it hit anything solid. The sound of the ram hitting things in the movie, that's not the actual impact. It's the sound of a sledgehammer hitting a dumpster, recorded separately and added in post-production. The real impact sound was more like crushing a cardboard box. Number 11. The backdoor troop deployment hatch was cut into the RV solely for comedic timing. GMC motorhomes don't come with dramatic rear deployment doors. They have regular RV doors on the side like any civilized camping vehicle, but the script called for soldiers to pour out the back during action scenes, so the production literally took a sawzall to a perfectly good motorhome. The cutting process was terrifying for everyone involved. The GMC motorhome's body was made of molded fiberglass, and nobody was quite sure what would happen when they cut a huge hole in the back. Would the whole structure collapse? Would it crack? The art department reinforced the area with steel frames before making the cut, basically building a roll cage inside the back wall. The door itself was a masterpiece of good enough engineering. They used barn door hinges from a farm supply store because they were the only ones strong enough to hold the weight. The door was supposed to drop down like a ramp, but it was too heavy and would slam down with enough force to crack concrete. They had to add garage door springs to slow its descent. Even then, actors had to jump back quickly after releasing the latch or I'd risk broken toes. The door created massive structural problems for the vehicle. The motorhome would flex and twist during driving, causing the door to jam. They had to adjust it constantly between takes. WD-40 became their best friend. They went through 12 cans just keeping that door operational. Water leakage was another issue. Despite rubber seals around the edges, rain would pour in during wet weather. They kept tarps and towels on hand constantly. The door's comedic timing was entirely manual. A stagehand would hide inside with a rope attached to the latch. On cue, they'd yank the rope, the door would fall, and actors would rush out. The timing had to be perfect. In one take, the stagehand pulled too early, the door dropped, and Bill Murray wasn't ready. He ad-libbed a line about premature deployment that made everyone laugh but couldn't be used in the family-friendly film. Number 10. The high-tech cabin panels were mostly repainted plywood with Christmas lights behind mesh. Step inside the EM50's command center, and you're greeted by walls of blinking lights, mysterious switches, and technical displays that scream military sophistication. In reality, you're looking at the clearance section of a 1981 Radio Shack held together with wood glue and hope. The main control panels were built from half-inch plywood painted battleship gray. The production team drilled hundreds of holes and inserted Christmas lights. Yes, the same ones your grandmother used on her tree. They bought about 3,000 multicolored bulbs from post-holiday sales. The lights were wired to blink randomly using timer circuits from model train sets. There was no logic to the blinking patterns. Red didn't mean danger. Green didn't mean safe. It was just random twinkling to look busy and important. The mesh screens covering these lights came from a hardware store. It was aluminum window, screening spray-painted black. They'd backlight it with more Christmas lights to create a glow effect. The radar screen was particularly creative. It was a green floodlight behind a window screen with a rotating piece of cardboard to create the sweeping effect. The cardboard was powered by a rotisserie motor from a barbecue grill. The toggle switches and buttons were the real deal. Military surplus from an Army-Navy store. But they weren't connected to anything meaningful. Maybe 1 in 10 actually controlled something, usually just more lights. The actors would flip switches dramatically during scenes, having no idea what they were supposed to do. Harold Ramis later joked that his character could have been turning on a coffee maker for all he knew. The labels on these switches were made with a label maker from an office supply store. They said things like deploy, engage, and activate without specifying what was being deployed, engaged, or activated. The production assistants made a game of coming up with the most military sounding but meaningless labels possible. Number 9, the upper periscopes actually functioned, made from surplus Navy optics. In a sea of fake technology, the EM50 had one element of genuine military hardware, working periscopes salvaged from decommissioned Navy submarines. These weren't props. They were actual optical instruments that had once helped real sailors navigate real oceans. The production bought them from a military surplus dealer in San Diego who specialized in submarine equipment. They cost $8,000 for the pair, which was more than they spent on all the fake armor combined. The periscopes were from a World War II-era submarine and weighed about 200 pounds each. Installing them required cutting precise holes in the roof and reinforcing the mounting points with steel plates. The optics still worked perfectly after 40 years. You could actually see clearly through them with about 4 times magnification. The problem was, they were designed for tall submarine compartments, not the low ceiling of an RV. They had to modify the extending mechanism so actors could actually reach the eyepieces. Bill Murray, who's 6 feet tall, still had to crouch awkwardly to look through them during filming. Here's the weird part. The periscopes were so well built that they threw off the vehicle's center of gravity. 200-pound weights mounted high on the roof made the EM50 dangerously top-heavy. During sharp turns, the vehicle would lean dramatically. They actually tipped it during a test run, though thankfully at low speed with no one inside. After that, they added ballast weights low in the chassis to compensate. The periscopes required constant maintenance, the leather seals around the eyepieces had deteriorated and needed replacement. The rotation mechanisms had to be lubricated daily or they'd freeze up. A retired Navy mechanic was hired just to maintain them during production. He said it was easier keeping them running on a submarine than on a movie set. The periscopes were the only parts of the EM50 that were later sold to collectors for serious money, about $20,000 each. Number 8. Some armor plates used air pistons to pop open dramatically on cue. For scenes where the EM50 takes damage or deploys hidden weapons, the production needed armor plates that could pop open on command. Their solution involved pneumatic pistons typically used in industrial automation, controlled by a tank of compressed air hidden in the vehicle. The system was ridiculously over-engineered for what amounted to a few seconds of screen time. They installed 12 pneumatic cylinders at various points around the vehicle, each connected to a specific armor plate. The air system ran at about 90 psi and could fire all pistons simultaneously or individually. The control system looked like something from a pipe organ, with individual valves for each piston operated from inside the vehicle. The flying armor effect was harder to achieve than expected. The first test sent plywood panels flying 30 feet, which was way too dangerous for filming. They had to add flow restrictors to slow the pistons down. Even then, they had safety cables attached to each panel to prevent them from hitting crew members. The cables were thin aircraft wire, invisible on camera but strong enough to stop a flying piece of plywood. The compressed air tank took up valuable space inside the already cramped vehicle. It was a 100-gallon tank that had to be refilled every 4 or 5 takes using a portable compressor. The refilling process took about 20 minutes and sounded like a jet engine. They could only do it between scenes because the noise would ruin audio recording. The tank also had an annoying tendency to leak. They went through more pipe tape and fitting compound than most plumbing supply stores stock in a month. The best malfunction happened during a crucial scene where all the panels were supposed to pop open simultaneously. Instead, they fired in sequence like dominoes because of a pressure drop in the system. It actually looked cooler than planned, so they kept it in the film. Sometimes technical failures create better effects than careful planning. Number 7. The RV received firmer springs to reduce sway during stunt driving. A stock GMC motorhome handles about as well as a yacht on wheels. The suspension was designed for comfortable highway cruising, not tactical maneuvers. When stunt drivers tried to make it look aggressive and military, the thing wallowed around corners like a drunk elephant. The suspension upgrade was a Frankenstein mixture of parts from different vehicles. They used heavy-duty springs from a 1-ton pickup truck in front, and airbags from a commercial bus in the rear. The shock absorbers came from a racing supply company and were originally designed for off-road trucks. Nothing was really meant to work together, but somehow it did, sort of. The ride quality after modifications was punishing. Every bump felt like hitting a brick wall. The stunt drivers wore kidney belts like motorcycle racers to protect their backs. Even at low speeds, the vehicle would bounce violently over small imperfections in the road. The actors complained constantly about being thrown around during driving scenes. They added extra padding to all the interior surfaces after Harold Ramis got a black eye from hitting a control panel during a particularly aggressive turn. The modified suspension created new problems. The stiffer springs raised the vehicle's ride height by about 3 inches, making it even more top-heavy. The front end would lift dramatically under acceleration, which looked cool on camera but terrified the drivers. They had to add 200 pounds of steel plates under the front bumper as ballast. The airbags in the rear had to be constantly adjusted depending on the shot. For normal driving, they'd run about 60 psi. For action scenes, they'd pump them up to 100 psi to reduce body roll. The compressor system for the airbags failed regularly from overuse. They went through 4 compressors during filming. Number 6. Most chase sequences use slow speeds because the EM50 handled poorly when weighted movie magic makes everything look faster than reality. Those exciting chase scenes where the EM50 tears through city streets, they were filmed at speeds that wouldn't get you a speeding ticket in a school zone. The vehicle's top safe speed for stunts was about 35 miles per hour. Any faster, and it became genuinely dangerous. The combination of high center of gravity, added weight, and modified suspension made it incredibly unstable. During one test run at 45 miles per hour, the vehicle went into a tank slapper oscillation that nearly flipped it. After that, they instituted a strict 35 mph speed limit for all action sequences. Camera tricks made everything look faster. They'd undercrank the cameras, shooting at 18 frames per second instead of 24. When played back, at normal speed, everything appears 30% faster. They'd also use longer lenses to compress the background, making it blur past more dramatically. The sound department added engine noises from actual military vehicles to make it sound more powerful and faster. The stunt drivers had to develop special techniques for making slow speed driving look aggressive. They'd saw at the steering wheel to create more body movement. They'd tap the brakes before corners to make the nose dive dramatically. They'd accelerate hard for just a second to lift the front end, then immediately back off. It was all about creating the illusion of speed and power without actually having either. The most dangerous scene was actually one of the slowest. When the EM50 crashes through a wooden gate, they were only going about 15 miles per hour. But the impact combined with the vehicle's weight and poor handling caused it to veer sharply left. The stunt driver had to wrestle it back under control while staying in character. They did 12 takes of that scene because they kept veering off their marks. Each take required rebuilding the gate, which cost about $500 in materials and labor. Number 5. The matte olive finish used aircraft-grade flat paint to avoid reflections during night shoots. That perfect military olive drab paint job wasn't just for looks. The production used specialized aircraft paint that cost $300 per gallon because regular paint caused massive problems with film lighting. The first paint job used standard automotive paint from Earl Scheib. It looked great to the eye, but was a disaster on camera. The slight gloss created hot spots where lights would reflect, ruining shots. During night scenes, every street light, every crew light, every ambient source would create distracting reflections. They had to completely repaint the vehicle with military specification flat paint designed for aircraft that need to avoid radar detection. The paint application was insanely detailed. They used high-volume, low-pressure spray guns typically used for aircraft refinishing. The paint had to be mixed with a special flattening agent that made it absorb light rather than reflect it. The mixture was so flat that fingerprints would show permanently if anyone touched it before it fully cured. The entire vehicle had to be cordoned off for 72 hours after painting. The paint was also incredibly fragile. It would chip if you looked at it wrong. Every branch that brushed against it, every piece of gravel that kicked up, would leave a mark. They had a full-time painter on set whose only job was touch-ups between takes. He'd walk around with a small airbrush, fixing chips and scratches constantly. By the end of production, the vehicle had about 15 layers of paint in some spots from all the touch-ups. The paint had another unexpected benefit. It made the vehicle nearly invisible at night without lights on it. During one night shoot, they actually lost track of where they'd parked it because it blended so perfectly into the darkness. They had to add reflective tape markers just so the crew could find it. The paint absorbed so much light that it would actually get hotter than surrounding surfaces during sunny days. You couldn't touch the vehicle's surface after it had been sitting in the sun without burning your hand. Number 4. The spinning dome was a repurposed commercial satellite dish motor, that intimidating radar dome on top of the EM-50, constantly rotating and scanning for threats. It was powered by a motor designed to help couch potatoes find the best satellite TV signal in 1981. The dome itself was a fiberglass radome from a small aircraft bought from an aircraft salvage yard for $200. It was originally designed to house weather radar equipment on a Cessna, but making it spin convincingly required some creative engineering. The production team bought a commercial satellite dish positioning motor from a high-end home electronics store. This thing was meant to slowly adjust large satellite dishes to track satellites across the sky. The motor was hilariously overpowered for spinning a lightweight fiberglass dome. It could have rotated something 10 times heavier, but that extra power came in handy when they decided to add lights inside the dome. They installed a ring of theater lights inside to create a glowing effect during night scenes. The lights, their wiring, and the slip rings needed to transfer power to rotating lights added about 50 pounds to the assembly. The rotation speed was controlled by a variable resistor, basically a giant dimmer switch. The operator could make it spin anywhere from 1 revolution per minute for scanning scenes to about 10 RPM for action sequences. Any faster and the dome would wobble dangerously. They actually threw the dome off completely during one test, sending it flying across the studio lot. It crashed through a production office window, though fortunately, no one was hurt. The motor made this annoying grinding noise that sounded nothing like military equipment. It was more like a garbage disposal eating a spoon. The sound department had to remove it from every scene and replace it with the sound of an electric turbine from a jet engine test facility. The real motor also had to be lubricated every 4 hours of operation or it would seize. They went through gallons of lithium grease keeping that stupid dome spinning. Number 3. A small onboard generator, powered lights, panels, and rotating props for self-contained filming. The EM-50 needed to be a self-contained movie set on wheels. All those blinking lights, rotating turrets, and glowing displays required serious electrical power. The GMC motorhome standard electrical system couldn't handle it, so they installed a gasoline generator that turned the vehicle into a rolling power plant. The generator was a 5 kilowatt Honda unit mounted in what used to be the rear storage compartment. It was barely adequate for the job. With all systems running, they were pulling about 4,800 watts, dangerously close to the maximum. Circuit breakers would trip constantly. They had to create a power priority list, deciding which effects were most important for each shot. If they needed the turret to rotate and the dome to spin simultaneously, they'd have to turn off half the interior lights. The generator exhaust was a major problem. The fumes would drift into the vehicle during filming, making everyone sick. They tried various exhaust extensions, but nothing worked perfectly. Eventually, they installed a marine exhaust system with a water-cooled muffler. They'd connect a garden hose to it when stationary, using the studio's water supply to cool and quiet the exhaust. This worked great until someone forgot to turn on the water and melted the entire exhaust system. The noise from the generator made recording dialogue impossible. Even with extra sound insulation, it sounded like a lawnmower running inside a metal box. Every scene inside the moving EM-50 had to be dubbed later. The actors would mouth their lines while the generator roared, then record the actual dialogue in a sound studio weeks later. Bill Murray reportedly hated this process and would deliberately change his lines during dubbing, creating continuity nightmares for the editors. The generator used about a gallon of gas per hour when fully loaded. The tank held 5 gallons, so they'd have to stop and refuel every few hours of filming. One time, they ran out of gas in the middle of a take, and everything shut down instantly. The sudden darkness caused Harold Ramis to walk into a wall, and Bill Murray ad-libbed a line about military budget cuts that had the crew in stitches. Number 2. 2 separate interior sets existed, one for driving shots and one for action sequences. Here's something most viewers never realized. When you see the inside of the EM50, you're actually looking at 3 different locations. There was the actual RV interior for driving shots, a larger studio set for action scenes, and a partial mock-up for close-ups. The actual vehicle interior was cramped and impossible to film in properly. With cameras, lights, sound equipment, and crew, there was barely room for actors to move. They could only shoot very specific angles, usually through the windows or from fixed camera positions. These shots were mainly used for scenes where you could see the vehicle was actually moving. The main interior set was built on Stage 15 at Burbank Studios. It was about 30% larger than the real interior, giving cameras room to move and actors space to perform. The walls were wild, meaning they could be removed individually for different camera angles. The ceiling was completely removable for overhead shots. This set had better lighting, safer props, and padded surfaces for stunt work. About 70% of interior scenes were shot here. The weird part was matching the 2 interiors. The set decorators had to constantly compare photos to make sure every switch, light, and panel matched between locations. They had a continuity Bible just for the interior details. Even then, sharp-eyed viewers can spot differences. The spacing between panels is different. The color of some lights varies. The seat positions don't quite match. The production hoped fast cutting would hide these inconsistencies. The third setup was a partial cockpit mock-up mounted on a gimbal for motion effects. When you see actors being thrown around during action scenes, they're in this mock-up being rocked by grips, pulling on ropes. It was basically a theme park ride dressed to look like the EM50 interior. They could create any movement, sharp turns, sudden stops, explosions. Warren Oates allegedly threw up twice during filming of the more aggressive motion scenes. Number 1. Despite being a joke vehicle, the EM50 became a cult icon and inspired real fan-built replicas. The ultimate irony of the EM50 urban assault vehicle is that this cobbled-together movie prop, held together with plywood and plumber's tape, became one of the most beloved fake military vehicles in cinema history. Fans have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars building replicas of something that cost about $30,000 to create originally. The first replica appeared just 2 years after the movie's release. A fan in Texas bought a GMC motorhome and spent 3 years converting it based on paused VHS screenshots. He didn't have access to production blueprints, so everything was estimated by eye. His version actually used steel armor plating, making it barely drivable, but definitely more authentic than the original. He spent about $60,000 on the conversion, twice what the movie prop cost. By the late 1990s, the EM50 had achieved legitimate cult status. Fan clubs formed specifically around the vehicle. They'd share construction tips, trade screenshots, and argue about details like the exact shade of olive drab paint. Someone created detailed blueprints by analyzing the film frame by frame and measuring visible objects for scale reference. These blueprints, more detailed than anything the original production created, became the Bible for replica builders. The craziest replica story involves a group of ex-military engineers who built a functional version. They added actual armor plating rated for small arms fire. The turret had a working paintball gun system. The smokescreen used military-grade smoke grenades. It was registered as an experimental vehicle and could only be driven on private property. They claimed to have spent over $200,000 on it. The original film's producers were simultaneously impressed and concerned about liability issues. Today, at least 15 known EM50 replicas exist worldwide. They show up at comic conventions, car shows, and movie memorabilia events. The original surviving prop vehicle, the one used for hero shots, sold at auction in 2015 for $120,000. Not bad for a motorhome covered in plywood. The buyer reportedly spent another $50,000 restoring it, including replacing all those Christmas lights with modern LEDs. The vehicle that was never meant to be taken seriously became a serious piece of cinema history, proving that sometimes the best military vehicles are the ones that could never survive actual combat. And there you have it. 20 weird facts about the EM50 urban assault vehicle that prove Hollywood magic is equal parts creativity and complete insanity. From Christmas lights pretending to be high-tech displays to stagehands pulling ropes to deploy automatic weapons, this glorified RV became a comedy legend through sheer determination and lots of plywood. Who knew that a motorhome dressed up for Halloween would become one of cinema's most beloved military vehicles? If you've got your own favorite movie vehicle that's probably held together with duct tape and dreams, drop it in the comments below. And hey, if you enjoyed this behind-the-scenes breakdown, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about Hollywood's beautiful lies. Until next time, remember, sometimes the best assault vehicle is just a recreational vehicle with delusions of grandeur. Number 20, the Ferrari wasn't actually a Ferrari at all. That's right, the star car of one of cinema's most famous automotive moments was a complete fake, a replica, a phony. The gorgeous red convertible that Cameron kicked through a glass window? Not a real Ferrari 250 GT California. It was actually a Modena GT Spider replica built specifically for the movie. Why? Because in 1985, when they were filming, real Ferrari 250 GT Californias were already worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Only about 100 were ever made between 1961 and 1963. John Hughes needed a car he could actually use for stunts. He needed something he could risk damaging. And most importantly, he needed something that wouldn't give Ferrari executives a heart attack when they saw what happened to it. The Modena replicas were so good that most viewers never noticed. They captured the elegant lines, the classic proportions, that unmistakable Italian sports car presence. But underneath that beautiful fiberglass body was something very different from what Enzo Ferrari had in mind. Number 19. Only 3 replicas were built for the entire production. Think about that for a second. 3 cars, that's it. Modena Design and Development, the company that created these masterful fakes, built exactly 3 working replicas for Ferris Bueller's Day Off. In today's blockbuster world, where productions routinely destroy dozens of cars for a single chase scene, using just 3 cars for an entire film seems almost quaint. But Neil Glassmoyer and Mark Goyette, the founders of Modena Design, knew what they were doing. Each replica had a specific purpose. One was the hero car for close-ups and beauty shots. Another was reinforced for stunts, including that famous parking garage jump. The third, well, let's just say it had a very specific and very final role to play. These weren't quick and dirty knockoffs either. Each one took months to build. The attention to detail was obsessive. Every curve had to be perfect. Every proportion had to match. Because even though they were fakes, they had to fool millions of moviegoers into believing they were watching the real deal. Number 18. The engine sounds were dubbed from a real Ferrari. Here's where things get really clever. The Modena replicas didn't sound like Ferraris because they didn't have Ferrari engines. They had Ford V8s. Specifically, small block Ford engines that sounded nothing like the exotic Italian V12 that powered the real 250 GT. So what did the filmmakers do? They recorded a real Ferrari 250 GT engine and dubbed those sounds over the footage in post-production. Every rev, every gear change, every purr of that supposedly exotic engine was actually coming from a genuine Ferrari recorded separately. This wasn't unusual for Hollywood, but it's still weird to think about. When Cameron nervously starts the car in his dad's garage, that beautiful engine note isn't coming from the car you're looking at. It's audio magic. The crew spent hours recording different engine sounds at various RPMs to match the action on screen. They even recorded the specific sound of the Ferrari's doors closing and its convertible top mechanism, because details matter when you're trying to sell an illusion. Number 17. The body was made entirely of fiberglass, not aluminum. Real Ferrari 250 GTs had hand-formed aluminum bodies crafted by Italian artisans at Scaglietti. Each panel was carefully shaped by skilled metalworkers using traditional techniques passed down through generations. The Modena replicas, pure fiberglass, cheaper, easier to produce, and much lighter than steel but heavier than aluminum. This actually created some interesting challenges during filming. Fiberglass doesn't dent like metal. It cracks and shatters, so the stunt team had to be extra careful during action sequences. One wrong move and instead of a small dent that could be popped out, you'd have a spiderweb of cracks that would ruin the shot. The fiberglass body also meant the car sounded different when touched. When Cameron kicks the car in anger, when Ferris runs his hand along the fender, when the parking attendants lean against it. All those sounds had to be enhanced in post-production because fiberglass doesn't have that satisfying metallic resonance that real car bodies produce. Number 16. It was powered by a Ford small block V8 engine. Under the hood of the Modena GT, Spider sat a very American heart, a Ford small block V8. Probably a 302 or 351 cubic inch engine. Reliable, powerful enough, and absolutely nothing like what Ferrari would ever put in one of their cars. This engine choice was purely practical. Ford V8s were cheap, readily available, and any mechanic in America could work on them. If something broke during filming, they could get parts from any auto store. Try finding Ferrari V12 parts on short notice in suburban Chicago in 1985. The Ford engine also meant the car had completely different performance characteristics. Different power delivery, different weight distribution, different handling. The stunt drivers had to adjust their techniques accordingly. But for a movie car that needed to be reliable, start every time, and survive multiple takes, that Ford V8 was perfect. It just wasn't Italian. Number 15. The chassis was completely custom fabricated by hand. Modena Design couldn't just drop a fiberglass Ferrari body onto an existing car chassis. The proportions would be all wrong. The wheelbase wouldn't match. The whole thing would look like exactly what it was, a kit car. So they built custom frames from scratch. Steel tube frames welded together to match the exact dimensions of a real Ferrari 250 GT California. Every measurement had to be perfect. The distance between the wheels, the height of the seats, the position of the engine. This wasn't some weekend garage project, this was serious engineering. The suspension components were sourced from various American cars but modified to fit the custom chassis. The steering geometry had to be worked out through trial and error. The weight distribution had to be balanced to make the car handle predictably for the stunt scenes. Each chassis took weeks to complete. And remember, they only built 3 of them. There was no room for error. Number 14. Sergio Scaglietti himself reportedly admired the replica's accuracy. Now this is where things get really interesting. Sergio Scaglietti, the legendary Italian coach builder whose company built the bodies for the original Ferrari 250 GT Californias, allegedly saw photos of the Modena replicas during production. And according to Hollywood legend, he was impressed. He supposedly commented on how accurate the proportions were, how well they'd captured the essence of his original design. Whether this story is completely true or has been embellished over the years, it speaks to just how good these replicas were. These weren't cheap knockoffs. They were serious attempts to recreate one of the most beautiful cars ever made. The fact that they might have fooled, or at least impressed, the man who built the originals is pretty remarkable. Of course, Scaglietti probably would have been less impressed if he'd looked under the hood and seen that Ford engine. Number 13. The interior was only loosely based on real Ferrari layouts. Step inside a real 1961 Ferrari 250 GT California, and you'll find hand-stitched leather, gorgeous Italian gauges, and switchgear that feels like jewelry. Step inside the Modena replica and, well, it looked the part on camera, but it was definitely not authentic. The dashboard was redesigned to be more film-friendly, gauges were positioned for better camera angles. The steering wheel was probably from some other car entirely. The seats looked right, but were likely modern reproductions with better padding for actor comfort. Even the famous speedometer that Cameron obsesses over was a custom piece. It had to be clearly readable on camera, and might not have even been functional. Most of the switches and controls were just for show. This was a movie car, not a Concours restoration. It needed to look good on film and be practical for shooting. Authenticity came second to functionality. The filmmakers knew that 99% of viewers had never seen the inside of a real Ferrari 250 GT anyway. Number 12. One replica was specifically reinforced just for stunts. Remember that heart-stopping moment when the Ferrari launches over the hill and lands hard enough to make everyone in the theater wince? That required a very special version of the Modena replica. The stunt car had a reinforced chassis, stronger suspension components, and extra bracing around critical stress points. They knew this car was going to take a beating, multiple takes of hard landings, high-speed runs, that famous reverse gear scene in the garage. The regular replicas couldn't handle that kind of abuse. So Modena built one specifically for punishment. This car probably had a roll cage hidden inside, definitely had upgraded shocks and springs. The engine and transmission mounts were beefed up to handle the impacts. Even with all these modifications, the stunt team was nervous about that jump. They only had one reinforced car. If they broke it, that was it. No more action shots. The pressure on that first take must have been incredible. Number 11. The car that went through the window was just an empty shell. Here's a Hollywood secret that might ruin the magic a little bit. When Cameron kicks the car and it rolls backward through the glass window, that wasn't one of the 3 functioning replicas. It was a 4th car, a non-running shell built specifically to be destroyed. This shell had no engine, no transmission, no interior beyond what the camera could see. It was essentially a fiberglass body on a basic frame with wheels. just enough to look like a car as it crashed through the glass and fell into the ravine below. Why build a separate shell? Because even though the replicas were fake Ferraris, they still cost real money to build. Destroying one of the 3 running cars would have been wasteful and expensive. Plus, without an engine and drivetrain, the shell was much lighter, making it easier to control during the stunt. The destroyed shell was never recovered from the ravine. It's probably still down there somewhere, slowly decomposing in the Illinois wilderness. A fiberglass monument to Cameron's daddy issues. Number 10. The movie caused real Ferrari 250 GT California prices to skyrocket. Before Ferris Bueller's Day Off, the Ferrari 250 GT California was already a valuable collector's car. But it wasn't the holy grail it would become. The movie changed everything. Suddenly, everyone knew what a 1961 Ferrari 250 GT California was. It became the ultimate symbol of automotive excess and beauty. Within a few years of the movie's release, prices for real 250 GT Californias doubled, then tripled, then kept climbing. The movie had turned an already rare car into a cultural icon. Every wealthy car collector wanted one. Not just because it was a Ferrari, but because it was the Ferrari. The Ferris Bueller Ferrari. Today, the influence of that movie on the car's value is impossible to calculate, but experts agree that Ferris Bueller's Day Off added millions to the value of every surviving example. John Hughes didn't just make a classic teen comedy, he accidentally created one of the greatest automotive advertisements ever filmed. Ferrari never paid a dime for product placement, but they reaped incredible benefits from the exposure. The irony is delicious. The movie that made the Ferrari 250 GT California impossibly famous didn't even use a real Ferrari. Number 9. A real 250 GT California eventually sold for over $15 million. The Ferris Bueller effect on Ferrari values reached its peak when a 1961 Ferrari 250 GT California SWB sold at auction for over $15 million. Part of that astronomical price was due to the car's rarity and racing provenance, but everyone in that auction room was thinking about Ferris Bueller. The auctioneer even mentioned the movie in his pitch. Think about that. A fake Ferrari in a teen comedy helped drive the value of real Ferraris into the stratosphere. The 3 Modena replicas cost maybe $30,000 each to build. The real cars they were imitating are now worth more than some small countries' annual budgets. If Cameron's dad really had owned a genuine 1961 Ferrari 250 GT California, his biggest worry shouldn't have been the mileage. It should have been inadequate insurance coverage. By today's standards, letting teenagers anywhere near a $15 million car would be grounds for involuntary commitment. The movie car might have been fake, but it created very real value for actual Ferrari owners. Number 8. Ferrari sued Modena Design after the film's release. You'd think Ferrari would be thrilled about all the free publicity. A blockbuster movie showcasing their beautiful design to millions of people. What's not to love? Apparently, quite a lot. After Ferris Bueller's Day Off became a hit, Ferrari's lawyers came after Modena Design. The issue wasn't the movie cars themselves, it was what happened after. Modena Design started selling replicas to private customers, regular people who wanted their own Ferris Bueller Ferrari but couldn't afford a real one. Ferrari was not amused. They claimed trademark infringement and design theft. The lawsuit got ugly. Ferrari argued that these replicas diluted their brand and confused consumers. Modena argued they were creating obvious replicas, not counterfeits. They weren't trying to pass them off as real Ferraris. Eventually, Modena agreed to stop production, but the damage to their business was done. The company that created one of cinema's most famous cars was essentially sued out of existence by the company whose car they were honoring. It's a cautionary tale about the difference between homage and infringement. Number 7. The garage was in a real glass house designed to display cars. That modernist glass box where Cameron's dad kept his precious Ferrari wasn't a movie set. It was a real house in Highland Park, Illinois, designed by architects A. James Spire and David Hade. The house was specifically designed with car enthusiasts in mind. The garage was meant to be a showcase with floor-to-ceiling windows that turned the cars into art pieces. You could see them from the living room. They were part of the home's aesthetic. This wasn't just a garage, it was a gallery. The location was perfect for the film's themes. The sterile, museum-like setting emphasized how Cameron's father treated his car, not as something to be driven and enjoyed, but as something to be preserved and worshipped from afar. The contrast between this temple to automotive perfection and what happens to the car is what makes the scene so powerful. That beautiful glass pavilion still exists today. It's a pilgrimage site for movie fans. And yes, the current owners are very tired of people asking about Ferris Bueller, but they can't escape it. Their house is forever linked to one of cinema's most famous scenes of automotive destruction. Number 6. The red paint was chosen for film, not Ferrari accuracy. The specific shade of red on the Modena replicas wasn't an exact match for any Ferrari factory color. It was chosen specifically to look good on film. In the 1980s, film stock had particular characteristics. Certain colors popped, others fell flat. The filmmakers needed a red that would look vibrant and luxurious on screen without being gaudy or fake-looking. They tested multiple shades before settling on the final color. It had to look good in the garage's artificial lighting. It had to look good in bright sunlight during the driving scenes. It had to look good in the shadows of the parking garage. The chosen red was slightly brighter and had more orange undertones than typical Ferrari reds of the period, but on film, it looked perfect. It became the color everyone associates with the Ferrari 250 GT California, even though it wasn't historically accurate. Today, when replica builders create their own versions, they often try to match the movie car's color rather than actual Ferrari colors. The fake has become more real than reality. Number 5. The replicas used aftermarket wheels that looked period correct. Real Ferrari 250 GT Californias wore genuine Barani wire wheels. Beautiful, delicate-looking wheels that were actually quite strong but incredibly expensive and hard to source, even in the 80s. The Modena replicas wore modern aftermarket wheels designed to look like Baranis. They had the right spoke pattern and knockoff centers, but they were built to accept modern radial tires instead of the bias ply tires of the 60s. This was another practical decision. Modern tires were safer for stunt work, they provided better grip for the driving scenes, and if one got damaged, replacements were readily available. But it's another layer of fakery in an already fake car. The wheels that looked so authentic spinning through Chicago were just as phony as everything else. Yet they were so well chosen that most Ferrari enthusiasts watching the movie never noticed. Even when the car is on the lift in the garage spinning backwards while Twist and Shout plays, those wheels look absolutely correct. It's a testament to how much effort went into making these replicas believable. Every detail mattered, even if that detail was itself a fake. Number 4. The suspension was modified to give the car a more dramatic stance. Car people will notice something subtle about the Ferris Bueller Ferrari. It sits differently than a real 250 GT California. The stance is more aggressive, more forward-leaning, more dramatic. This was intentional. The Modena replicas had modified suspension geometry that lowered the front slightly and raised the rear. It gave the car a predatory crouch that looked fantastic on camera. It made the car look faster even when it was standing still. Real Ferraris of that era had a more level stance. They were designed for high-speed stability on Italian autostradas, not for looking menacing in American movies. But this is Hollywood, where everything is heightened for effect. The modified stance also helped hide some of the proportional differences between the replica and the real thing. By changing how the car sat, they could minimize certain visual discrepancies that might have given away the deception. It's another example of how these weren't just copies, they were interpretations. Movie versions of a real car optimized for their specific purpose to look incredible on film. Number 3, they never showed the engine bay in detail for a reason. Watch Ferris Bueller's Day Off carefully and you'll notice something. We never get a good look at the engine. There's no scene where someone pops the hood to admire that supposedly gorgeous Ferrari V12. That's because under that hood was a very American Ford V8 that would have immediately destroyed the illusion. The filmmakers knew this was a problem, so they simply avoided it. Every shot was carefully composed to never reveal the mechanical truth. Even in the garage scenes where Cameron is examining the car, we never see him lift the hood. This wasn't an oversight, it was careful planning. Showing that Ford engine would have been like seeing the zipper on a monster costume. It would have ruined everything. In the few shots where the hood might be partially visible, it's always in shadow or at an angle where you can't see details. The engine bay was probably dressed up to look vaguely correct from a distance, but it could never stand up to scrutiny. It's Hollywood smoke and mirrors at its finest. Don't show what you can't fake convincingly. Number 2. 2 of the 3 replicas still exist today in private collections. After filming wrapped, the 3 Modena GT Spiders went their separate ways. The shell that went through the window was destroyed, of course, but the other 2 survived and found their way into private collections. These cars have become valuable in their own right. not as Ferrari replicas, but as important pieces of movie history. They're the cars that launched 1,000 teenage dreams, the cars that made everyone want to play hooky and drive around Chicago. One of them sold at auction for over $300,000. Think about that. A fake Ferrari, selling for 10 times what it cost to build purely because it was in a movie. The current owners of these replicas are in a unique position. They own something that's simultaneously fake and authentic, fake Ferraris that are real movie cars. They're conversation pieces that come with an incredible story. These cars can never be what they pretend to be. But they've become something arguably more interesting. They're artifacts of one of the most beloved movies of the 1980s. They're tangible connections to a moment in pop culture that defined a generation. Number 1, the entire Ferrari plot was added to give Cameron a character arc. Here's the ultimate weird fact about Cameron's dad's Ferrari. It almost wasn't in the movie at all. In John Hughes' original script, Cameron's character arc was much simpler. The Ferrari subplot, the obsession with his father's car, the ultimate destruction of it, all of that was added later to give Cameron something meaningful to overcome. Hughes realized that Ferris couldn't really change during the movie. He was already perfect in his own way, but Cameron needed to grow. He needed to stand up to his father. He needed to break free from his fears. The Ferrari became the perfect symbol for all of that. It represented everything Cameron's father valued more than his own son. By destroying it, even accidentally, Cameron was finally taking control. What started as a script revision became the emotional heart of the movie. That fake Ferrari carried more symbolic weight than any real car ever could. It wasn't just a car, it was Cameron's prison, his father's love, his own self-worth, all wrapped up in fiberglass and Ford engine. The fact that it was fake makes it even more perfect. Cameron was destroying an illusion, the illusion that things matter more than people. That preservation is more important than living. That fathers should love cars more than sons. In the end, the fake Ferrari taught us something real about life. And there you have it, 20 weird facts about Cameron's dad's Ferrari that prove sometimes the fake thing can be more interesting than the real thing. Did you know the car was a replica before watching this? And which of these facts surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments below. And hey, if you enjoyed this deep dive into movie car history, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss our next behind the scenes revelation. Until next time, life moves pretty fast. If you don't stop and look around once in a while, you could miss it. Number 20. The Ecto-1 wasn't just any old ambulance conversion. It was actually a 1959 Cadillac Miller Meteor ambulance and hearse combination vehicle. Yes, you heard that right. A hearse. The same vehicle used to transport the dead was repurposed to hunt the undead. Talk about irony. This wasn't your typical car choice for a comedy film. Miller Meteor was a specialty coach builder that created these dual-purpose vehicles for funeral homes and hospitals that needed versatility. The company would take standard Cadillac commercial chassis and extend them, creating these massive land yachts that could serve multiple purposes. What made this particular model special was its combination configuration. It could function as both an ambulance with emergency equipment and a hearse with the appropriate interior modifications. The Ghostbusters production team specifically chose this model because of its imposing size and distinctive profile. At 21 feet long and weighing over 3 tons, this beast of a vehicle had presence. The elongated body provided plenty of room for all the ghost hunting equipment they'd need to install. Plus, let's be honest, there's something inherently creepy about using a vehicle associated with death to chase ghosts. The symbolism wasn't lost on the filmmakers. They wanted something that looked official and intimidating, but also slightly absurd. A converted hearse ambulance hybrid perfectly captured that balance between professional and paranormal. Number 19, here's something that'll blow your mind about rarity. Only about 400 Miller Meteor units like the one used for Ecto-1 were ever manufactured. 400. Total, ever. That's it. These weren't mass-produced vehicles rolling off assembly lines by the thousands. Each one was essentially hand-built by skilled craftsmen at the Miller Meteor facility in Piqua, Ohio. The company would receive Cadillac commercial chassis directly from General Motors, then spend weeks transforming them into these specialized vehicles. The process involved cutting the frame, extending it, reinforcing the structure, and completely customizing the interior. Every weld, every panel, every modification was done by hand. This wasn't just about bolting on some extra parts. The entire vehicle had to be re-engineered to handle the additional length and weight, while maintaining structural integrity. Finding one of these vehicles in 1983, when Ghostbusters was in pre-production, was already becoming difficult. Most had been used hard in commercial service and were either scrapped or in poor condition. The production team had to search extensively to find suitable candidates. They eventually located their vehicles through specialty dealers who handled retired emergency and funeral vehicles. The fact that they found not one, but two in reasonable condition was somewhat miraculous. Today, finding an original Miller Meteor in any condition is like striking gold. Most have been destroyed, converted, or are sitting in private collections. The Ecto-1's fame has made surviving examples even more valuable and sought after by collectors. Number 18, under that massive hood sat a 6.3-liter V8 engine producing around 320 horsepower. Sounds impressive, right? Well, here's the thing. The car weighed so much it was painfully slow. We're talking about a vehicle that tipped the scales at nearly 7,000 pounds when fully loaded with equipment. That's 3.5 tons of steel, chrome, and ghost-busting gear trying to move through New York City traffic. The power-to-weight ratio was absolutely terrible. While 320 horsepower sounds like a lot, when you're dragging that much mass around, acceleration becomes leisurely. 0 to 60, you'd better pack a lunch. The cast members who had to drive it during filming consistently complained about its sluggish performance. Dan Aykroyd later joked that the car's top speed was eventually. Bill Murray supposedly refused to drive it after his first attempt, claiming it handled like a shopping cart full of bowling balls. The weight distribution was also a nightmare. With all that equipment mounted on the roof, the center of gravity was dangerously high. Taking corners required planning and prayer. The suspension, already stressed from the vehicle's weight, groaned under the additional load of the paranormal detection equipment. Stunt drivers had to be extremely careful during chase scenes. What looked like high-speed pursuits on screen were actually filmed at much lower speeds, then edited to appear faster. The famous scene where they race through New York to the hotel? They never exceeded 35 miles per hour during filming. Number 17. Dan Aykroyd's original vision for the Ectomobile was completely different from what we got. He wanted it black, jet black, with purple and white strobe lights, creating what he described as a sinister, ultraviolet glow. Can you imagine? Instead of the cheerful, almost goofy-looking vehicle we know and love, Aykroyd envisioned something that looked like it belonged in a horror movie. His concept was for the Ghostbusters to arrive on scene in this intimidating, gothic-looking vehicle that would immediately signal something supernatural was happening. The purple lighting was specifically chosen because Aykroyd believed ultraviolet light had paranormal properties. He'd researched various ghost hunting theories and found references to spirits being visible under UV light. The white strobes would provide contrast and emergency vehicle legitimacy, while the purple would give it that otherworldly appearance. The design included matte black paint that would absorb light, making the vehicle appear as a shadow moving through the city. The equipment on top would be chrome and silver, creating a stark contrast against the dark body. Aykroyd even suggested adding fog machines to the undercarriage so the car would appear to glide on a cloud of mist. His vision was influenced by hearses he'd seen at New Orleans jazz funerals, combined with his fascination with the occult. He wanted the vehicle to be simultaneously respectful of the dead and threatening to the undead. The studio executives were initially on board with this darker concept, thinking it would add production value and visual interest to the film. Number 16. So why didn't we get the Black Ecto-1? Simple. Most of the movie was filmed at night, and a black car would be practically invisible on screen. The cinematographer took one look at the shooting schedule and immediately vetoed the dark paint job. Filming in New York City at night with 1980s film technology meant they needed every bit of light reflection they could get. A black vehicle would simply disappear into the background, becoming a moving void in every shot. Test footage proved the point dramatically. When they shot mock-ups with a dark-colored vehicle, you couldn't make out any details. The car looked like a shadow, and all the carefully designed equipment on the roof was completely lost. The audience wouldn't be able to see what made this vehicle special. They needed something that would pop on screen, especially during the night scenes that made up about 70% of the film. White was chosen specifically because it would reflect the practical lights they were using for filming. It would catch streetlights, neon signs, and their production lighting, making the vehicle visible and dynamic in every shot. The red trim was added to give it that authentic emergency vehicle look while also providing visual interest during daylight scenes. The change from black to white fundamentally altered the tone of the vehicle. Instead of sinister and threatening, it became approachable and slightly comedic. This actually worked better for the film's comedy-horror balance. The white Ecto-1 looked official but not intimidating, professional but quirky. Number 15. In early script drafts, the Ecto-1 wasn't just a car. It had supernatural powers. legitimate supernatural powers, like dematerializing and traveling between dimensions. Aykroyd's original screenplay, which was apparently the size of a phone book, featured an Ecto-1 that was basically a TARDIS for ghost hunters. The vehicle could phase through solid matter, allowing the Ghostbusters to drive through walls when chasing spectral entities. It could shift into parallel dimensions where ghosts resided, becoming a bridge between the world of the living and the dead. There was even a sequence where the car would become transparent, allowing the team to observe ghosts without being detected. The interdimensional travel concept was particularly elaborate. The script described the Ecto-1 entering the Ghost Zone, a parallel New York where all the deceased residents still lived their afterlives. The car would shimmer and fade as it crossed between realities, its molecular structure adapting to each dimensional frequency. Aykroyd had written entire action sequences around these abilities. One chase scene had the Ecto-1 pursuing a ghost through multiple dimensions simultaneously, appearing and disappearing across different planes of existence. Another sequence featured the car dematerializing to escape a collapsing building, rematerializing on the roof. The special effects team calculated the cost of achieving these visuals with 1980s technology. The number they came back with was more than the entire production budget. Even with optical effects and miniatures, creating believable dimensional travel would have been prohibitively expensive and time-consuming. Number 14. The man who built the Ecto-1 had exactly 2 weeks to design everything. 2 weeks. Stephen Dane, the hardware consultant, didn't just build the car. He designed the proton packs, the ghost trap, the PKE meters, the containment unit, and basically every piece of ghost-busting equipment you see in the film. 14 days to create an entire fictional technology ecosystem that would define a franchise for decades. Dane was brought in after the original prop designer quit due to the impossible deadline. The production was already behind schedule, and they needed someone who could deliver fast. Dane was known for his work on commercials where quick turnarounds were standard. He immediately set up a workshop and started sketching. His approach was to raid surplus stores, electronic waste facilities, and military equipment dealers. He'd grab anything that looked vaguely technological or scientific, then figure out how to combine them into believable ghost hunting gear. The Ecto-1's roof rack alone required dozens of different components. Dane sourced everything from radar dishes to ventilation systems, welding them together into a configuration that looked both functional and absurd. He worked 18-hour days sleeping in the workshop to save commute time. His wife brought him meals because he couldn't spare the time to leave for food. The 2-week deadline meant no time for second-guessing or redesigns. Whatever he built first had to work. The fact that his designs became so iconic is a testament to his skill and intuition about what would look good on camera. Number 13, here's a detail that bothers prop enthusiasts to this day. Stephen Dane's name was misspelled in the credits as Stephen Dane. With a V, not a PH, this man created some of the most recognizable props in cinema history, working under an impossible deadline, and they couldn't even spell his name right. The misspelling wasn't caught until after the film's release. By then, thousands of prints had been made and distributed worldwide. The error was never corrected in subsequent releases, meaning millions of people have seen his work credited to Stephen instead of Stephen. Dane himself was reportedly philosophical about it. He joked that at least they got his last name right, and that being in the credits at all was more than most prop builders got in those days. But for film historians and prop enthusiasts, it's become a famous example of how technical crew members often don't get the recognition they deserve. The irony is that Dane's work became so iconic that prop replicas based on his design sell for thousands of dollars. People obsess over every detail of his creations, studying behind-the-scenes photos to get the exact placement of every component. Yet the film itself couldn't get his first name right. This spelling error has become part of Ghostbusters trivia, often mentioned in documentaries and making of features. It's a small mistake that highlights how quickly and chaotically the film was made, with everyone focused on making the deadline rather than double-checking details. Number 12. The roof rack of Ecto-1 is loaded with completely fictional equipment that somehow looks totally legitimate. There are directional antennas, radome domes, scrubbers, and various other components that Dan Aykroyd insisted all had specific paranormal detection functions. None of it was random. Every piece had a purpose in the Ghostbusters fictional technology. The radome domes, those white bubble-shaped objects, were supposedly muon detectors that could identify particle streams from ghostly manifestations. The directional antennas were designed to triangulate spectral energy sources, allowing the team to track ghosts across the city. The scrubbers, those cylindrical devices with the mesh covers, were meant to filter ectoplasmic residue from the air. Aykroyd had written up technical specifications for each component. He created an entire pseudoscientific explanation for how ghost detection worked, complete with made-up particles and energy signatures. The art department had to make visual representations of these completely theoretical devices. They accomplished this by repurposing real equipment in clever ways. The muon detectors were actually marine radar domes. The scrubbers were industrial ventilation components. The antennas came from military surplus stores. Everything was painted and modified to look cohesive, creating the illusion of purpose-built paranormal equipment. What's remarkable is how believable it all looked. Audiences completely bought into the idea that this was specialized ghost hunting gear. The design was so successful that real paranormal investigators started trying to build functional versions of the equipment based on what they saw in the film. Number 11. The old ambulance gurney wasn't thrown away during the conversion. It was repurposed as a pull-out rack for the proton packs. This is the kind of practical thinking that makes the Ecto-1's design so clever. They took an existing feature of the ambulance and gave it new life in their ghost hunting vehicle. The gurney mechanism was already built to slide smoothly in and out while supporting significant weight, perfect for heavy nuclear accelerators that the Ghostbusters wore on their backs. The original stretcher surface was replaced with custom mounting brackets that held the proton packs securely during transport. The designers added power connections so the packs could charge while stored. When the Ghostbusters arrived at a call, they could simply slide out the rack, grab their packs, and go to work. This wasn't just a prop detail. The mechanism was fully functional during filming. The actors actually used it to store and retrieve the proton packs between takes. It made the vehicle feel lived in and practical, like a real working vehicle rather than just a movie prop. The gurney conversion also solved a practical problem. The proton packs were heavy and cumbersome. Having a slide-out storage system at waist height meant the actors didn't have to bend down or reach up to get their equipment. It was ergonomic design that made sense both in the film's universe and for the actual production. This attention to functional detail is part of what makes the Ecto-1 so memorable. It felt like a real emergency vehicle that had been intelligently modified for a new purpose. Number 10. The Ecto-1's siren wasn't a siren at all. It was a leopard snarl played backward and manipulated in post-production. Let that sink in for a moment. That distinctive wail that immediately tells you the Ghostbusters are coming? That's an angry big cat reversed and twisted into something completely unrecognizable. The sound design team tried dozens of different siren combinations, but nothing sounded quite right. Traditional emergency vehicle sirens were too familiar. They needed something that sounded official, but also slightly wrong, like it came from another dimension. The breakthrough came when someone played a recording backward during a sound mixing session. The leopard snarl was originally recorded for a different project entirely. When reversed, it created this haunting, oscillating sound that was perfect for the film. They layered it with electronic tones and traditional siren elements to create the final effect. The sound became so iconic that it created problems during filming. When they drove the Ecto-1 through New York with the siren going, real emergency vehicles would pull over, thinking it was an actual emergency. People would stop and stare, confused by this official-looking vehicle making such an unusual sound. The NYPD eventually asked them to stop using the siren during filming unless absolutely necessary. For subsequent Ghostbusters productions, the sound effect has been carefully preserved and reused. It's become as important to the franchise as the theme song. You can't have an Ecto-1 without that distinctive leopard snarl siren. Number 9, there weren't just one, but two Miller Meteor Cadillacs bought for the production. Everyone assumes there was just one Ecto-1, but the filmmakers were smarter than that. They purchased two identical 1959 Miller Meteors for the production. One became the fully dressed hero car with all the equipment, while the other served multiple purposes throughout filming. The second car was crucial for several reasons. First, it appeared in all the before scenes, showing the vehicle in its deteriorated state before the Ghostbusters fixed it up. This saved them from having to dirty and then clean the hero car repeatedly. The backup also served for long shots and scenes where the full roof equipment wasn't necessary. The second vehicle was used for interior shots too. They could remove seats and panels to fit cameras and sound equipment without damaging the hero car. When they needed to film the actors inside while driving, the backup car was often towed on a process trailer, allowing for safer and more controlled filming. This two-car system also provided insurance. If something happened to the hero car, they had a backup that could be quickly modified to continue filming. Given how temperamental these old vehicles were, having a spare wasn't just smart, it was essential. After filming wrapped, the two cars had very different fates. The hero car went on to appear in Ghostbusters 2 and became the iconic vehicle we all remember. The backup car largely disappeared from public view, eventually ending up in private collections where it's been restored to various specifications over the years. Number 8. During the filming of Ghostbusters 2, the Ecto-1 literally died on the Brooklyn Bridge. Not scripted, not planned. The car just broke down completely, belching smoke and grinding to a halt right in the middle of one of New York's busiest thoroughfares. The smoke you see in some shots wasn't special effects. That was the Ecto-1's engine giving up the ghost, so to speak. The timing couldn't have been worse. They were filming a crucial scene where the Ghostbusters raced to the museum. The Brooklyn Bridge had been closed to regular traffic for the shoot, with hundreds of extras and crew members in place. Then suddenly, the star vehicle decided it had had enough. The 30-year-old Cadillac's engine overheated and seized. The ancient cooling system, already stressed from carrying all that extra weight, finally failed completely. Coolant was everywhere. Steam poured from under the hood. The smell of burning metal and rubber filled the air. The entire production ground to a halt. The mechanical failure was so complete that the car couldn't even be pushed out of the way. They had to wait for a heavy-duty tow truck capable of moving the 7,000-pound vehicle. Meanwhile, the bridge remained closed, the crew stood around burning money, and the producers watched their schedule fall apart. The breakdown became part of Ghostbusters legend. Dan Aykroyd later said it was like the car was protesting having to work on the sequel. Bill Murray supposedly quipped that even the Ecto-1 knew the script needed work. Number 7. The Brooklyn Bridge breakdown caused such a massive traffic jam that the NYPD fined the production. We're not talking about a small inconvenience here. The Ecto-1's mechanical failure created a traffic nightmare that rippled across multiple boroughs. The production had permits to close the bridge for specific windows of time. When the Ecto-1 died, they exceeded those windows by hours. The disabled vehicle couldn't be moved quickly, and the elaborate film setup meant they couldn't just reopen the bridge to traffic immediately. The backup stretched for miles in both directions. Angry New Yorkers, already frustrated with Hollywood taking over their city, were honking and screaming. Local news stations sent helicopters to cover the chaos. The headline, "Ghost Car Dies on Bridge," appeared in the next day's tabloids. The NYPD issued multiple citations to the production. There were fines for exceeding their permitted time, additional fines for the traffic disruption, and penalties for failing to have adequate contingency plans. The total cost reportedly reached 6 figures, though the exact amount was never publicly disclosed. The production team had to negotiate with city officials to continue filming in New York. They promised better vehicle maintenance, backup transportation plans, and additional payments to the city's film office. The Brooklyn Bridge incident became a cautionary tale for other productions about the importance of maintaining picture vehicles. Columbia Pictures wasn't happy. The studio executives demanded explanations for how a crucial picture vehicle could break down so catastrophically. The incident led to new policies about vehicle redundancy and maintenance for major productions. Number 6. When the Ecto-1 was being shipped for various filming locations, the logistics were absolutely insane. The car traveled by train, but its massive roof rack had to be sent separately by plane. The roof equipment made the vehicle too tall to clear standard railway bridges and tunnels. Shipping the Ecto-1 became a complex military-style operation. The car itself would be loaded onto a special railcar designed for oversized vehicles. The roof rack, with all its delicate equipment, would be carefully removed, crated, and flown to the destination. Teams at each end had to coordinate the disassembly and reassembly perfectly. The process took days. First, they'd photograph and document every piece of equipment's exact position. Then, skilled technicians would carefully remove each component, labeling and packing them individually. The metal framework of the rack itself would be unbolted and lifted off with a crane. At the destination, the reverse process would begin. The rack would be reattached, then each piece of equipment reinstalled according to the documentation. Any mistake could result in continuity errors that sharp-eyed fans would notice. The whole operation cost thousands of dollars each time they moved the vehicle. Insurance for shipping the iconic car and its equipment was astronomical. The studio required multiple handlers and security guards to accompany both shipments. There were backup plans for backup plans. If the train was delayed, they had contingencies. If the plane couldn't fly, they had ground transportation ready. The shipping documents alone filled multiple binders detailing every component and its value. Number 5. Despite looking completely ridiculous with all that equipment on top, the Ecto-1 was actually fully drivable. This wasn't a pushed-around prop or a vehicle that only worked for specific shots. They used a working chassis throughout filming, and the car could legitimately drive with all that gear mounted on the roof. The engineering required to make this work was significant. The roof rack and equipment added nearly 800 pounds to the top of an already top-heavy vehicle. The suspension had to be completely rebuilt to handle the additional weight and the dramatically altered center of gravity. Heavy-duty springs and shocks were installed to prevent the car from wallowing in corners. The frame was reinforced at key stress points to handle the additional load. The steering system was modified to deal with the change weight distribution. Even the tires were upgraded to handle the extra mass. But here's the really impressive part. All the lights and sirens actually worked. The entire electrical system was rewired to power the various emergency lights, strobes, and that distinctive siren. The car could roll up to a location with everything blazing and wailing, looking exactly as it did in the film. Driving it was apparently terrifying. Ernie Hudson, who played Winston, later described it as like piloting a building. The roof equipment created massive wind resistance, making highway driving particularly challenging. Crosswinds could push the vehicle into other lanes. Parking garages were obviously out of the question. The vehicle was so tall with the rack installed that it couldn't clear most underpasses without careful route planning. Number 4. After filming ended, the original Ecto-1 deteriorated badly. Really badly. This iconic piece of cinema history was basically left to rot in a Sony Pictures backlot, exposed to the elements and largely forgotten. By the early 2000s, it was in terrible shape. The paint was faded and peeling, rust had eaten through several body panels, the interior was full of mold and mildew, the roof equipment was corroding and falling apart. Some pieces had been stolen by souvenir hunters who snuck onto the lot. The mechanical components were seized from years of sitting idle. The car that had once raced through New York chasing ghosts couldn't even start. The tires were flat and cracked, windows were clouded and cracking, the famous siren no longer worked. It was a sad end for such an important piece of film history. The deterioration was so severe that when Sony finally decided to restore it for the 25th anniversary, they initially considered it might be beyond saving. The restoration team found extensive structural damage that required cutting out entire sections and welding in new metal. Fans were horrified when photos of the deteriorated Ecto-1 leaked online. How could Sony let this happen to such an iconic vehicle? Petitions were started. Angry letters were written. The fan campaign to save the Ecto-1 became a rallying cry for film preservation advocates. The backlash was so intense that Sony executives were reportedly shocked. They hadn't realized how important this car was to people. The Ecto-1 wasn't just a prop to fans, it was a character, a symbol of their childhood, a piece of cultural history that deserved respect. Number 3, the fan campaign to restore the Ecto-1 actually worked. After years of online petitions, letter writing campaigns, and public shaming, Sony finally committed to a full restoration. This wasn't just a quick paint job and some new tires. This was a ground-up restoration that would return the vehicle to its screen-accurate 1984 glory. The restoration team, led by Cinema Vehicle Services, spent over a year bringing the Ecto-1 back to life. Every component was either restored or recreated exactly as it appeared in the original film. They tracked down original parts from Miller Meteor vehicles, sourced period-correct Cadillac components, and recreated the custom equipment that had been damaged or stolen. The attention to detail was obsessive. They analyzed film footage frame by frame to ensure every piece of roof equipment was positioned correctly. The exact shade of white paint was matched using spectrographic analysis of original paint chips. Even the license plates were recreated using the same manufacturing techniques from 1984. The mechanical restoration was equally thorough. The engine was completely rebuilt, the transmission was overhauled, every brake line, fuel line, and electrical wire was replaced. The car didn't just look like the Ecto-1, it drove like new. When the restored vehicle was unveiled at Sony Pictures Studios, grown adults literally cried. Fans who had campaigned for years to save the car finally got to see their efforts rewarded. The Ecto-1 had been saved from oblivion and restored to its full glory. Number 2. Today, the restored Ecto-1 lives in a private collection as a preserved cultural icon. After all that drama, Sony eventually decided the car was too valuable and too important to risk further deterioration. It's now maintained in climate-controlled storage, brought out only for special events and carefully managed appearances. The current owner, whose identity remains confidential, is reportedly a massive Ghostbusters fan who paid an undisclosed but presumably enormous sum for the vehicle. Part of the purchase agreement includes provisions for the car to appear at certain Sony events and Ghostbusters anniversaries. It's essentially treated like a priceless artwork now. The storage facility where it's kept maintains perfect temperature and humidity levels to prevent any deterioration. The car is started and run regularly to keep all mechanical systems functional. Every appearance requires careful planning and security. When the Ecto-1 travels to events, it's transported in an enclosed trailer with climate control and shock-absorbing suspension. Insurance policies worth millions of dollars are taken out for each trip. The handlers who maintain it wear white gloves when working on the vehicle. Not a fingerprint is allowed to mar the perfect paint. Every component is documented and photographed regularly to track any changes or wear. It's the kind of treatment usually reserved for vintage Ferraris or Bugattis worth tens of millions. The transformation from forgotten prop to treasured artifact shows how powerful nostalgia and fan dedication can be. This car transcended its role as a movie vehicle to become something more significant, a tangible piece of shared cultural memory that people genuinely care about preserving. Number 1. In the Ghostbusters universe, the Ecto-1's equipment isn't just decorative. According to the fictional specifications, it includes Moon scrubbers, EMF scrubbers, and a drone trap dome, all serving specific paranormal purposes. Dan Aykroyd created an entire technical manual for the vehicle that was never published but influenced everything you see on screen. The muon scrubbers supposedly filter subatomic particles generated by ghostly manifestations. When ghosts materialize, they allegedly disturb the quantum field, releasing muons that can be tracked and analyzed. The scrubbers collect these particles, allowing the Ghostbusters to identify what type of entity they're dealing with and how powerful it is. The EMF scrubbers work on a different principle. They detect and filter electromagnetic field disruptions caused by spectral entities. Ghosts, according to Aykroyd's mythology, exist partially in the electromagnetic spectrum, causing measurable disturbances that these devices can isolate and amplify. The data feeds directly into the vehicle's onboard computer system. The drone trap dome is perhaps the most ingenious fictional component. It's designed to deploy miniature ghost traps via remote-controlled drones, allowing the Ghostbusters to set traps in dangerous or inaccessible locations. The dome contains 6 drones, each carrying a scaled-down trap that can be activated remotely. But here's what's really mind-blowing. Aykroyd worked with actual physicists to make his pseudoscience as plausible as possible. He consulted with parapsychology researchers and quantum physicists to create internally consistent explanations for how his ghost hunting technology would work. The technical specifications he wrote included mathematical formulas, energy requirements, and operational parameters. While obviously fictional, the documentation was detailed enough that prop builders could understand what each component was supposed to do and design accordingly. This level of world building is why the Ecto-1 feels so real. It's not just a car with random junk bolted to the roof. Every piece has a purpose, a function, a reason for being there. The vehicle represents a complete paranormal investigation platform designed with the same logic you'd apply to a real emergency response vehicle. Aykroyd even specified what the various lights meant. Red indicated active paranormal presence. Blue meant the equipment was scanning. White strobes warned of imminent manifestation. The siren's different tones allegedly indicated different threat levels. It's this attention to fictional detail that makes the Ecto-1 endure as an icon. And there you have it. 20 weird facts about the Ecto-1 that prove this iconic vehicle is way more than just a converted hearse with a fancy paint job. From leopard snarls to dimensional travel, from Brooklyn Bridge breakdowns to fan-powered resurrections, the Ecto-1 story is as supernatural as the ghosts it was built to catch. Did any of these facts surprise you? Let us know in the comments below, and tell us what your favorite Ecto-1 moment from the films is. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this deep dive into Ghostbusters history, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next video. Until next time, remember, when there's something strange in your neighborhood, you know exactly what car to call. Number 20, the hood scoop was completely fake. So here's something that'll make purists cringe. That aggressive-looking hood scoop on Lane's Camaro, totally fake, not functional, just for show. The prop department literally glued it on for filming because they thought it looked cooler. And honestly, they weren't wrong. The non-functional scoop gave the car that perfect mix of trying too hard teenage ambition that matched Lane's character perfectly. But here's the kicker. When fans later restored the actual movie car, they kept the fake scoop, because sometimes movie magic is better than mechanical reality. The decision came down to pure aesthetics. The film's transportation coordinator wanted something that screamed muscle car to audiences who might not know the difference between a small block and a big block. So they went to a local auto parts store, bought an aftermarket fiberglass scoop, and slapped it on with industrial adhesive. Years later, when Camaro enthusiasts examined the car, they found adhesive residue and drill marks that didn't match any factory mounting points. It became one of those details that hardcore fans argue about at car shows. Should a restoration be screen accurate or mechanically accurate? In this case, they chose the movie magic. Number 19. The paint job changed colors 3 times during filming. This is wild. The Camaro actually appears in 3 different shades of black throughout the movie, not on purpose. The original paint was so oxidized that every time they buffed it for a scene, it got slightly shinier and darker. By the end of filming, the car looked almost blue-black in certain lights. The continuity department just gave up. They figured nobody would notice. And for 30 years, nobody really did until some obsessive fan went through the film frame by frame. The paint situation got so bad that in some scenes, they had to spray the car with a dulling agent to make it match earlier footage. But here's where it gets really weird. The dulling spray would wear off during driving scenes, so the car would literally change shade as it moved down the street. One scene shows the car looking flat black in the driveway, then glossy black by the time it reaches the corner. The restoration team that eventually got the car had to analyze paint samples from 7 different spots to figure out what the original color actually was. They found everything from flat black primer to metallic blue-black clear coat. The car was basically a rolling timeline of desperate paint fixes. Number 18. It had a secret nitrous system that was never used. The prop department installed a complete nitrous oxide system in the trunk. Full bottle, lines, solenoids, everything. The plan was to have the lane accidentally activated during the drag race scene for comedy. But John Cusack refused to do the stunt after the stunt coordinator explained what nitrous actually does to an engine. He was convinced the car would explode. It wouldn't have, but nobody could convince him otherwise. So this fully functional nitrous system just sat there, unused through the entire production. What makes this even funnier is that they spent $3,000 in 1985 money installing this system. The studio accountants were furious when they found out it was never used. There's actually footage somewhere of the director trying to convince Cusack that nitrous is safe, with Cusack responding, "Then you drive it." The compromise was to film the drag race scene without the nitrous and add engine sound effects in post-production. To this day, if you look carefully at the trunk scenes, you can spot the blue nitrous bottle tucked behind the spare tire. When the car was sold after filming, the new owner was shocked to discover a complete professional-grade nitrous system that had never been activated. He reportedly used it exactly once before chickening out, just like Cusack. Number 17. The dashboard was from a completely different car. Here's something nobody talks about. The dashboard in Lane's Camaro isn't from a 1967 Camaro. It's from a 1969 Firebird. Why? Because the original dash was destroyed when a crew member spilled an entire thermos of coffee on it 3 days into filming. The coffee soaked into the padding and started growing mold in the California heat. The smell was reportedly so bad that actors refused to sit in the car. The transportation department had exactly 1 day to fix it. They couldn't find a 67 Camaro dash anywhere in Los Angeles, but they found a 69 Firebird in a junkyard in Van Nuys, and it was close enough. They figured nobody would notice the difference, except Firebird owners noticed immediately when the movie came out. The gauge cluster is completely wrong, the radio placement is different, even the glove box handle is from the wrong year. It became this weird inside joke in the Pontiac community that Better Off Dead secretly featured a Firebird pretending to be a Camaro. The best part? When fans restored the movie car decades later, they kept the Firebird dashboard because it was now part of the car's movie history. Number 16. John Cusack couldn't actually drive stick. This is embarrassing. John Cusack didn't know how to drive a manual transmission when filming started. The Camaro in the movie was supposed to be automatic, but the car they bought for filming had a 4-speed manual. Instead of teaching Cusack or finding another car, they came up with an insane solution. They welded the shifter in 3rd gear. Permanently, the car could only operate in 1 gear for the entire movie. Every driving scene with Cusack behind the wheel, 3rd gear. Starting from a stop sign, 3rd gear. Parking, 3rd gear. The clutch was basically destroyed by day 2 of filming. They went through 4 clutches during production. The transportation coordinator later said it was the stupidest solution to the simplest problem he'd ever seen. But it worked, sort of. If you watch carefully, you'll notice Cusack never actually shifts. His hand goes to the shifter sometimes, but it never moves. They added shifting sound effects in post-production to cover it up. When the car was restored years later, The new owner found the transmission was basically fossilized in third gear. It took a complete rebuild to make it functional again. Number 15. The engine sound was from a Corvette. Every single engine sound you hear from the Camaro in Better Off Dead is actually from a 1978 Corvette. The real Camaro's engine sounded, according to the sound director, like a sick lawnmower. So they brought in a Corvette with a built-for 27 big block, recorded it for 3 hours, and dubbed all those sounds over the Camaro footage. The funny part is they didn't even try to match the RPMs. There's a scene where the Camaro is clearly idling, but the sound is a high rev scream. Another scene shows it accelerating slowly, but the audio is from a full throttle drag strip run. The sound editor's notes, which surfaced years later, literally say, "Nobody will care." And honestly, they were mostly right. Except for one group, Camaro owners. They immediately recognized that the exhaust note was wrong. The cam lobe was wrong. Everything was wrong. It became this running joke that the movie's Camaro identified as a Corvette. Some fans even started calling it the Camervette at car shows. Number 14. There were actually two cars. Everyone thinks there was one hero Camaro in Better Off Dead. Nope, there were two identical cars and they were swapped constantly. One was the pretty car for close-ups. The other was the stunt car for driving scenes. Except here's the thing, they weren't actually identical. The stunt car was a 1968 Camaro with 67 badges glued on. Nobody noticed until 2010 when a fan bought what he thought was the movie car, only to discover the VN indicated a 68. The mix-up happened because the transportation coordinator found a beat-up 68 for cheap and figured close enough. They swapped out the grille, added rally sport badges, and called it a day. But if you know Camaros, the differences are obvious. The vent windows are wrong, the side markers are in different positions. The entire rear quarter panel is a different shape. Throughout the movie, the car literally changes model years between shots. There's one scene where Lane gets in a 67 and gets out of a 68 in the same continuous sequence. The restoration community still argues about which car is the real movie car. The answer, both and neither. Number 13. The French exchange student never actually touched the engine. Remember that montage where Monique helps Lane rebuild the engine? The actress never touched a single tool. Every shot of hands working on the engine belonged to a 47-year-old mechanic named Carl from Burbank. They filmed all the mechanical work separately, then edited it together with reaction shots of the actors. The actress later admitted she didn't even know how to open the hood. But here's the really weird part. Carl, the mechanic, became oddly famous in the Los Angeles car scene because of those hand shots. People recognized his distinctive skull ring in the movie and started calling him Better Off Dead Carl. He supposedly leveraged this into getting free drinks at car meets for years. He even started signing autographs as Monique's hands. The production company tried to credit him as a stunt double, but he refused because he said he wasn't doing stunts, just working on a car while someone filmed it. To this day, his hands are probably the most famous anonymous hands in 80s cinema. Number 12, the drag race opponent was supposed to be a Mustang. Originally, Lane was supposed to race against a 1965 Mustang, not a Falcon. They had the Mustang on set and everything. But during the first take, the Mustang's transmission exploded. Literally exploded. Pieces of the bell housing went through the floorboard. The driver was okay, but the car was toast. With no budget for another Mustang, they grabbed a Falcon from a crew member's cousin and painted it orange overnight. The Falcon was slower than the Camaro by about 4 seconds in the quarter mile, which ruined the dramatic tension of the race. So they came up with a solution that would make any car person cringe. They had the Camaro driver ride the brakes during filming to make it look closer. You can actually see the brake lights flicker during the race if you look carefully. The Falcon owner was apparently thrilled his car was in a movie until he saw it on screen and realized they made it look faster than a Camaro. He spent the next decade explaining to people that his Falcon wasn't really that quick. Number 11. The hood pins were installed backwards. This is such a perfect metaphor for the whole movie. The hood pins on Lane's Camaro were installed backwards. Instead of securing the hood, they actually made it less stable. The prop department didn't realize their mistake until the hood flew open during a driving scene and smashed the windshield. Instead of fixing them, they just welded the hood shut for the rest of filming. Every scene after that incident where someone opens the hood, movie magic. They'd cut away, switch to the other car, or use a hood from a different Camaro entirely. There's actually a continuity error where the hood pins switched direction between shots because they were using footage from before and after the incident. The welded hood created another problem. the engine overheated constantly because they couldn't add coolant easily. The solution? They drilled a hole through the hood and installed a hidden funnel. If you know where to look, you can spot the patched hole in several scenes. Number 10. The license plate changed 5 times. Nobody kept track of the license plates. The Camaro appears with 5 different California plates throughout the movie. Not prop plates. Real registered plates from various crew members' personal cars. They just grab whatever plate was available that day and slap it on. The legal department had a meltdown when they found out during post-production. The plates belonged to the transportation coordinator's wife's Honda, a Grip's pickup truck, the director's mother's Cadillac, a borrowed plate from a rental car that was definitely illegal, and one plate they literally found in the parking lot and never identified. The studio had to retroactively get permission from all the plate owners to use their numbers in the film. The rental car company threatened to sue until the studio paid them $5,000 in licensing fees. The best part is that one of those plates got a dozen parking tickets during filming that the studio had to pay because they were legally responsible for the vehicle while displaying that plate. Number 9. The restoration scene was filmed in reverse. The famous restoration montage where the Camaro transforms from junk to beautiful, most of it was filmed in reverse. They started with a pristine Camaro, then progressively made it worse while filming. When played backwards, it looked like restoration. This is why some movements look oddly unnatural. Tools being put down look like they're jumping into hands. Rust appearing looks like it's being cleaned off. The decision to film in reverse came after they realized they'd have to actually restore a car on camera, which would take weeks. Instead, they took a nice 67 Camaro from a collector, paid him $10,000 to let them destroy it over 3 days, then bought him an even nicer one afterwards. They sprayed it with fake rust, loosened body panels, threw dirt on the engine, and even poured oil everywhere to make it look neglected. The collector reportedly cried watching them ruin his car, even though he knew he was getting a better one. The fake rust wouldn't stick properly to the waxed paint, so they had to sand down sections just to make it look bad. Essentially, they had to damage the car to make it look damaged. Number 8. The shifter knob was from a bowling trophy. The custom shifter knob that Cusack grabs dramatically in several scenes, it's literally the ball from a bowling trophy. The prop master's kid had won 3rd place in a youth bowling league, and they needed something round and distinctive. They unscrewed the little golden bowling ball from the trophy and threaded it onto the shifter. The kid was apparently furious when he found out, but it gets better. That bowling ball shifter became such an iconic part of the car that when fans restored the movie Camaro, they tracked down the exact same trophy model from 1984 to recreate it. There's now a cottage industry of better off dead replica shifter knobs made from youth bowling trophies. The original trophy, minus its ball, still sits in the prop master's garage. He's been offered serious money for it by collectors, but he keeps it because his son, now in his 40s, still hasn't forgiven him. The bowling alley that hosted that youth league in 1984 even has a small plaque mentioning their trophy's contribution to cinema history. Number 7. The tires were mismatched on purpose. All 4 tires on the Camaro were different brands and sizes. This wasn't a mistake or budget issue. The director thought matching tires looked too perfect for a teenager's project car, so they specifically sourced 4 different tires. A Goodyear, a Firestone, a BF Goodrich, and something called a Power King that nobody had heard of even in 1985. The mismatched tires created a handling nightmare. The car pulled hard to the left under braking and would hop sideways during acceleration. The stunt driver called it the worst handling car I've ever driven on purpose. They had to reshoot several scenes because the car would veer unexpectedly out of frame. One scene required 14 takes because the car kept drifting into parked cars. When the car was restored decades later, the new owner found that the front left tire was actually a snow tire painted to look like a regular tire. The tread pattern was completely different, which explained why the car handled like it was on ice, even in dry conditions. Number 6, there's a dead rat in the door panel. During a restoration in 2003, the new owner found a mummified rat inside the driver's door panel. Based on the age and condition, it had been there since filming. The theory is it crawled in while the car was in storage between shoots and died. This means that in every scene with John Cusack driving, there was a decomposing rat about 6 inches from his elbow. The smell must have been masked by all the other smells in the car, the moldy coffee-damaged dashboard, the constantly overheating engine, the various fluids leaking everywhere. Several crew members mentioned the car smelled terrible, but everyone assumed it was just old car smell. The rat was so well preserved that the restoration team kept it and created a small display case with a plaque reading supporting actor, Better Off Dead, 1985. It's supposedly still displayed at classic car shows as part of the car's history. The discovery also explained why there was a suspicious stain on the inside of the door panel that multiple restoration attempts couldn't remove. Number 5. The Camaro. Almost killed the director. During the filming of the drag race scene, director Savage Steve Holland decided he wanted to ride along to see what it looked like from inside the car. The stunt driver warned him about the welded third gear situation and the bad tires, but Holland insisted. First turn, the car spun out and went backwards into a fence at about 40 miles per hour. Holland was fine, but refused to get in the car again. The fence belonged to a house that turned out to be owned by a lawyer who specialized in personal injury cases. He came out, saw the damaged fence and a movie crew, and his eyes lit up like Christmas. The studio ended up paying him $30,000 to not sue, which was more than they paid for both Camaros combined. The best part, the crash is actually in the movie. If you watch the drag race scene carefully, there's a quick cut where the Camaro suddenly appears to jerk sideways. That's the beginning of the spin, but they cut away before it got bad. Holland later said it was the most expensive 2 seconds of footage in the entire movie. Number 4. It was almost destroyed in a real street race. 2 weeks after filming Wrapped, the Camaro was sitting in a storage lot in Van Nuys when 2 kids broke in and tried to steal it for illegal street racing. They got it started, drove it about 3 blocks, then crashed it into a mailbox when they couldn't figure out how to get it out of third gear. Remember, the transmission was still welded in place. The kids abandoned the car and ran, but the police found them because one of them left his wallet on the passenger seat. Turned out they were huge Better Off Dead fans who wanted to race the actual movie car. The studio didn't press charges after the kids' parents paid for the mailbox and the damaged front bumper. Those kids are now in their 50s and supposedly still tell the story of how they almost successfully stole the Better Off Dead Camaro. The mailbox they hit was replaced with a reinforced steel one that's still there today, with locals calling it the Camaro-proof mailbox. Number 3. The Rally Sport badges were upside down. For the entire movie, the RS badges on the Camaro are mounted upside down. Nobody noticed during filming. Not the transportation coordinator, not the director, not even the Camaro-owning crew members. It wasn't until the movie was in theaters that Chevrolet sent a strongly worded letter to the studio pointing out the mistake. By then, it was too late to fix. The badges had been installed by a production assistant who had never seen a Camaro before and just guessed which way they went. When questioned later, he said he thought the S looked like a 5, so he oriented it to be readable as R5. The Chevrolet letter apparently caused a minor panic at the studio, with executives worried about lawsuits or having to recall the film. Chevrolet's legal team eventually decided it was actually good publicity because it showed that even Hollywood needed Chevrolet's expertise. The upside-down badges became such a famous mistake that when replicas of the car are built, some owners deliberately install their badges upside down as a tribute to the movie. Number 2. The car's current owner won it in a poker game. After changing hands 6 times since the movie, the Camaro was won in a high-stakes poker game in Las Vegas in 2018. The previous owner, a casino executive, put it up as collateral in a private game and lost with a full house to 4 aces. The winner didn't even know what Better Off Dead was. He just thought he was winning a classic Camaro. When he found out about the car's history, he tried to sell it immediately for $500,000. Nobody would pay that much, so he started researching the movie and became obsessed. He's now one of the biggest Better Off Dead fans in the world, despite never seeing the movie before winning the car. He spent over $200,000 on additional restoration, tracking down original parts, and even hired a private investigator to find the original bowling trophy shifter knob. He brings the car to every Better Off Dead screening within 500 miles and charges exactly $2 for photos, the same price as the drag race bet in the movie. He claims he's made about $12,000 so far, which means he only needs about 400,000 more photos to break even. Number 1. John Cusack has never acknowledged the car exists. Here's the weirdest fact of all. John Cusack has never, not once, publicly acknowledged the Camaro from Better Off Dead. He's talked about hating the movie. He's talked about regretting it. He's even apologized to the director. But in 40 years of interviews, he's never mentioned the car. Not once. When fans have brought die-cast models of the Camaro for him to sign at conventions, he refuses. When someone brought the actual car to a screening he was attending in 2012, he walked past it without looking. The current owner has tried to contact him multiple times to offer him a ride in the restored car. No response. There's even a conspiracy theory among Better Off Dead fans that Cusack was somehow traumatized by the car during filming. The truth might be simpler and sadder. Multiple crew members have said that Cusack genuinely couldn't drive the car properly and was embarrassed by how many scenes required a stunt double. Every driving shot where you can't see his face, that's someone else. He apparently spent hours practicing in the parking lot, but could never get the hang of the welded third gear. Situation. One crew member said Cusack called the car "my four-wheeled humiliation." The director has confirmed that Cusack's hatred of the movie might actually stem from his frustration with the car. Imagine being the lead in a car movie when you can't actually drive the car. 40 years later, he still won't talk about it. And there you have it. That's 20 weird facts about Lane Meyer's 1967 Camaro from Better Off Dead that prove sometimes the best movie cars are the ones that barely worked. Did any of these facts surprise you? Do you have your own Better Off Dead car story? Drop it in the comments below. And hey, if you enjoyed this deep dive into 80s movie car history, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell so you don't miss our next video about movie cars with mysterious histories. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Number 20. The car was already retired from service. The Bluesmobile started life as an actual California highway patrol cruiser, not a replica, not a movie prop built from scratch. This was a real cop car that had already seen years of hard service before the Hollywood came calling. By 1979, when production started, this Monaco had been retired from active duty and was sitting in a surplus lot. The production team specifically wanted authentic retired police vehicles for that genuine worn-out look. No need for artificial aging here. These cars had already been beaten up by real cops chasing real bad guys. The odometer showed over 100,000 miles before filming even began. That distinctive black and white paint scheme, original CHP colors just touched up for the cameras. The wear patterns on the seats, the dings in the body panels, the slightly misaligned hood, all authentic battle scars from years of highway patrol duty. Director John Landis insisted on this authenticity. He didn't want shiny new cars pretending to be old. He wanted vehicles that looked like they'd been through hell because, well, they had been. Number 19. They actually used 13 different cars. Here's something most people don't realize. That one Bluesmobile you see throughout the movie, it's actually 13 different cars playing the same role. 13 1974 Dodge Monacos, all painted and dressed to look identical. Why so many? Because they kept destroying them. Some were designated for specific stunts, others were camera cars. A few were hero cars for close-ups with the actors. Each one had slightly different modifications depending on its intended fate. The jump cars had reinforced frames and special suspension. The crash cars had roll cages hidden inside. The hero cars had working cigarette lighters because Dan Aykroyd actually smoked in character. The continuity department had their work cut out for them, making sure damage from one scene didn't magically disappear in the next. They kept detailed logs of which car was used when and what condition it was supposed to be in. By the end of production, most of these Monacos were completely destroyed. Only one or two survived intact. Number 18. The Mount Prospect Jump was real. That famous scene where the Bluesmobile launches through the air in Mount Prospect. No special effects, no wires, no miniatures. They actually drove a real Monaco off a real ramp at 70 miles per hour. The car flew 118 feet through the air. That's not a typo. 118 feet. The stunt driver was barely conscious when he landed. The impact was so severe it compressed his spine by half an inch. The car's suspension completely collapsed. The engine mounts sheared off. The transmission fell out onto the pavement. But they got the shot. And what a shot it was. The production had to get special permits from the FAA because the car achieved enough altitude to technically enter controlled airspace. They stationed ambulances at both ends of the jump just in case. The stunt team calculated everything precisely, but there was still that moment of pure terror when the car left the ramp. No second takes on this one. They had one car, one chance, one absolutely insane stunt that somehow worked perfectly. Number 17, Dan Aykroyd. Personally owned one after filming Rap, Dan Aykroyd couldn't bear to see all the Bluesmobiles go to the crusher, so he bought one. Not just any one. He picked the best surviving hero car and had it restored. He kept it at his house in Los Angeles for years. Occasionally he'd take it out for drives, showing up at random places in full Blues Brothers costume. Imagine being at a red light and looking over to see Elwood Blues himself in the actual Bluesmobile. Aykroyd treated that car like a member of the family. He knew every dent, every quirk, every strange noise it made. When the engine finally gave out in the late 80s, he had it completely rebuilt with upgraded parts. He even installed a better sound system so he could blast blues music properly. The car became his personal time machine, a way to revisit those crazy days of filming in Chicago. Eventually, he donated it to a museum, but only after extracting promises that it would be properly maintained and occasionally driven. Cars need to move, he said. They're not meant to just sit there. Number 16. The cop motor was actually disappointing. Everyone remembers Elwood's sales pitch about the Bluesmobile, cop motor, cop tires, cop suspension, cop shocks. Sounds impressive, right? Here's the truth. The 1974 Monaco's police package wasn't actually that special. The engine was a 440 cubic inch V8. Sounds big, but by 1974, emissions regulations had choked it down to about 230 horsepower. That's less than a modern Honda Accord. The cop tires were just heavy-duty radials rated for high-speed pursuit. The cop suspension was stiffer springs and bigger sway bars. The cop shocks were heavy-duty units designed to handle the extra weight of police equipment. In reality, these cars were chosen for durability, not performance. They could run all day without overheating. They could take abuse without braking. But fast? Not really. The movie cars had some engine work done to make them more responsive for stunts. But that legendary cop motor Elwood bragged about, it was more marketing than muscle. The real magic was in how they filmed it, making this relatively slow car look like a rocket ship. Number 15. It could really hit 120. Despite the modest horsepower, the Bluesmobile really could hit 120 miles per hour. How? Simple physics. The Monaco was surprisingly aerodynamic for a brick-shaped 70s sedan. That long hood and fastback roofline actually worked. Plus, the police package included a higher numerical rear axle ratio for better top speed. During the highway chase scenes, stunt drivers regularly pushed these cars past 100. The speedometer shots weren't faked. Those needles really were buried. Of course, at those speeds, the Monaco became somewhat terrifying to drive. The steering got light and vague, the brakes started to fade, the whole car would start to float and wander. One stunt driver described it as riding a rocket-powered couch down the highway. But for brief moments, with enough straight road and a brave enough driver, the Bluesmobile could genuinely fly. Just don't ask how long it took to get there, or how it handled when it did. Number 14. The mall chase destroyed everything. The Dixie Square mall chase remains one of the most destructive scenes ever filmed. And here's the weird part. The mall was already abandoned. It had been closed for over a year when filming began. The production basically rented a dead mall and turned it into their personal demolition derby, but they still had to buy all the stuff they destroyed. Every storefront was dressed with real merchandise, real mannequins, real display cases, real everything. The Bluesmobile plowed through about $700,000 worth of props and set dressing. That's in 1979 dollars. The stunt required precise timing. Too fast and they'd overshoot their marks. Too slow and the car would get bogged down in debris. They had one shot at most of the stores because once you've driven through a shop window, it's pretty hard to reset for take two. The cleanup afterward took weeks. Glass everywhere. Mannequin parts scattered like a bizarre crime scene. And somehow, through all that destruction, the Bluesmobile kept running. They reinforced the front end with steel plating hidden behind the bumper. Otherwise, it was just a standard Monaco smashing through walls like they were made of paper. Number 13. John Belushi couldn't drive stick. Here's an embarrassing secret. John Belushi, who played Jake Blues, couldn't drive a manual transmission. This became a problem because several scenes required him to be behind the wheel. The solution? Movie magic. In shots where you see Jake driving, the car was usually being towed or pushed by another vehicle. The gear shifter he's moving, not connected to anything. The clutch pedal he's pressing, just for show. Dan Aykroyd did most of the actual driving when both brothers were in the car. He was a genuine car enthusiast who knew his way around a transmission. For wider shots where you couldn't see who was driving, stunt drivers wore sunglasses and suits. The famous parking garage scene where they spin the car, that's a professional stunt driver in a fat suit, made to look like Belushi. The producers briefly considered teaching Belushi to drive stick. After one terrifying lesson where he nearly drove into Lake Michigan, they decided movie magic was safer for everyone involved. Number 12, the cigarette lighter. Really worked. One of the most quoted lines from the movie is about the cigarette lighter, and yes, it really worked. In fact, it was one of the few things that consistently worked in these beat-up cars. Dan Aykroyd smoked during filming and insisted on having functional lighters in all the hero cars. This created a weird situation where the props department had to regularly check and maintain the cigarette lighters, while ignoring more important things like, say, the brakes. The lighter became a running joke among the crew. Here's this car that's falling apart, held together with wire and hope, but by God, that cigarette lighter works perfectly. It was almost metaphorical, the little things still functioned even as the big things failed. During one take, the lighter was the only electrical component that worked. The headlights had died, the radio was dead, the horn didn't work. But push in that lighter and 30 seconds later, pop, ready to go. Aykroyd later said it was his favorite detail about the car, this absolute wreck that somehow maintained one tiny bit of dignity. Number 11. The rocket launcher. Scene was almost real. Remember when the Bluesmobile gets hit with a rocket launcher? The producers originally wanted to use a real explosive, not a real rocket, but a real explosion with a real car. The stunt team rigged a Monaco with explosive charges and prepared for the most expensive single shot in the movie. Then someone did the math. The explosion they planned would have shattered windows for 3 blocks. The permit requirements alone would have cost more than the entire car budget, so they scaled it back, way back. The final effect used a combination of pyrotechnics and miniatures. The car you see flipping was actually a detailed model about 3 feet long. The explosion was real but much smaller than planned. They composited it together in post-production, but here's the weird part. They still had the fully rigged car ready to blow. It sat on set for days with everyone nervously avoiding it. Eventually, they carefully removed all the charges and used the car for other scenes. Somewhere in the movie, you're watching what was almost a car bomb just driving around Chicago. Number 10. The Illinois Nazis scene. Used real Nazis. Okay, not real Nazis, but real neo-Nazi protesters. When word got out they were filming a scene with Illinois Nazis, actual white supremacist groups showed up to protest. They were angry about being portrayed as buffoons. The producers had hired actors to play Nazis, but when real ones showed up, John Landis had an idea. He offered them $50 each to be in the background. Most refused, but a few took the money. So in that scene where the Blues Brothers drive through the Nazi rally, some of those angry faces are genuinely angry actual neo-Nazis. The stunt, where the Nazis jump off the bridge, was obviously done with stunt performers. But the crowd reactions? Some of that outrage was real. The FBI actually showed up on set that day, concerned about potential violence. Nothing happened, but the tension was real. Aykroyd later said it was one of the most uncomfortable days of filming. Here they were, making a comedy, suddenly dealing with actual hate groups. The Bluesmobile plowing through their rally became oddly cathartic. Number 9. Chicago. Actually shut down. Lower Wacker Drive. The chase scene through Lower Wacker Drive required something unprecedented. Chicago actually shut down this major thoroughfare for 3 weeks. Not 3 days. 3 weeks. This is a main artery under downtown Chicago, and they closed it for a movie. The city had never done anything like this before or since. The production had to pay overtime for hundreds of city workers. They had to reroute traffic patterns throughout downtown. They had to coordinate with every building that had loading docks on Lower Wacker. The mayor's office got thousands of complaints, but they stuck with it because they wanted to show Chicago could handle major film productions. The weird part, they filmed everything they needed in about 4 days. The rest of the time was setup, cleanup, and safety checks. But the contract said 3 weeks, so they kept it closed for 3 weeks. City officials would randomly show up to make sure they were actually filming something. The production started shooting random inserts and background plates just to look busy. Number 8. The speedometer was deliberately broken. In several scenes, you can see the Bluesmobile's speedometer showing impossible readings. Doing 30, but the needle shows 70. Stopped but indicating 50 miles per hour. This wasn't a continuity error. The speedometers were deliberately disconnected in most of the stunt cars. Why? Insurance reasons. If a stunt went wrong and someone got hurt, the insurance company would want to know how fast the car was going. If the speedometer didn't work, they couldn't prove the driver was being reckless. It was a legal loophole that the production exploited. The working speedometers were only in the hero cars used for close-ups. Even then, they were often disabled for specific scenes. The props department had a collection of speedometer cables they could quickly connect or disconnect as needed. During the Mount Prospect jump, they specifically disconnected the speedometer so there'd be no official record of the launch speed. The stunt driver knew he was doing about 70, but officially, no data available. Number 7. The car could actually fit through that gap. The scene where the Bluesmobile squeezes between 2 trucks, they measured it. The Monaco was 79.7 inches wide. The gap between the trucks was 81 inches. That's 1.3 inches of clearance on each side, about the width of 2 fingers. The The stunt driver had to hit that gap at exactly the right angle at exactly the right speed. Too fast and he'd bounce off. Too slow and he'd get wedged. They did 17 takes before getting it right. 17 times threading a 2-ton needle at 40 miles per hour. The successful take was actually an accident. The driver was supposed to slow down more, but his brake pedal stuck. He went through faster than planned, which made it look more dramatic. The cameras almost missed it because nobody expected him to maintain that speed. Both side mirrors were torn off in the process, which wasn't planned but looked perfect on film. For the rest of the movie, the Bluesmobile has no side mirrors, maintaining continuity from this one slightly botched but perfect stunt. Number 6. The engine sound was from a different car. Here's something that'll blow your mind. The engine sound you hear in the movie, it's not from a Monaco. It's from a 440 Plymouth Roadrunner recorded years earlier for another movie. The sound designers tried recording the actual Bluesmobile engines, but they sounded terrible. These were worn-out, emissions-choked motors that wheezed more than they roared. So they went to their library of engine sounds and found this beautiful, angry, muscular recording from a heavily modified Plymouth. Every time you hear the Bluesmobile accelerate, you're actually hearing a completely different car. They had to carefully sync the sound to match the gear changes and RPMs shown on screen. Sometimes they'd layer multiple engine recordings to get the right effect. The distinctive starter sound when Elwood fires up the Bluesmobile, that's real. It's one of the few authentic Monaco sounds in the movie. That grinding, reluctant, please God start noise was exactly how these cars sounded after years of abuse. Number 5. It really did have a cop suspension. Unlike the disappointing cop motor, the police suspension package was legitimately special. The Monaco police package included heavy-duty torsion bars up front and extra leaf springs in the rear. The shocks were 50% stiffer than civilian models. The sway bars were nearly twice as thick. This setup was designed to handle the weight of police equipment and the stress of high-speed pursuit. It made the ride harsh, but the handling predictable. The weird part, this suspension was almost too good for the movie. The car didn't lean dramatically in corners. It didn't bounce entertainingly over jumps, it just stayed flat and composed. So, the stunt team actually softened some of the suspensions to get more body roll and drama. They wanted the car to look like it was barely under control. The police suspension was fighting them every step of the way, trying to keep things stable when they wanted chaos. In the end, they found a compromise. Softer springs, but keeping the heavy sway bars. This gave them the body motion they wanted while maintaining enough control for safety. Number 4, the license plate was a hidden joke. The Bluesmobile's license plate reads BDR 529. Seems random, right? It's not. BDR stands for Black Diamond Riders, which was the name of Dan Aykroyd's motorcycle gang when he was a teenager in Canada. 529 was his membership number. Nobody in the production knew this except Aykroyd. He specifically requested that plate number and wouldn't explain why. It wasn't until years later in an interview that he revealed the connection. The props department made dozens of these plates because they kept getting destroyed or stolen. Crew members would grab them as souvenirs. By the end of production, they'd made over 40 BDR 529 plates. The original hero plate from the main car was supposedly stolen on the last day of filming. Aykroyd claims he doesn't know who took it, but there's a suspicious BDR 529 size gap in his memorabilia collection. Number 3, the roof speakers were functional. Those speakers mounted on the Bluesmobile's roof, they actually worked. They were wired into a real amplifier powered by a separate battery in the trunk. During filming, they'd actually play music through them for background artists to react to. The sound quality was terrible, of course. These were cheap PA speakers designed for voice, not music, but they were loud, really loud. The neighbors around filming locations would complain about blues music blasting at 6 in the morning. The speakers created an unexpected problem during driving scenes. At anything over 30 miles per hour, the wind resistance would try to tear them off the roof. They had to reinforce the mounting brackets multiple times. Eventually, they built dummy speakers from foam that looked identical but weighed almost nothing. The real speakers were only used for stationary shots. But in that scene where they're driving through Chicago announcing their show, those are the real speakers really playing music while really annoying everyone within half a mile. Number 2, John Landis crashed. 1. Himself director. John Landis insisted on doing one stunt himself. Not a big stunt, just backing the Bluesmobile into a pole during the mall chase. How hard could it be? Pretty hard, as it turned out. Landis hit the accelerator instead of the brake and drove straight through a jewelry store display. $7,000 worth of damage in 3 seconds. The crew was terrified, not because of the damage, but because their director had nearly killed himself doing a simple backing up maneuver. The insurance company was furious. Landis was banned from driving any vehicle for the rest of the production. The footage of his crash actually made it into the movie. It's one of those random destruction shots during the mall sequence. Landis later admitted he had no idea how difficult stunt driving was until he tried it himself. He gained new respect for the stunt team and gave them bigger bonuses. He also kept a piece of the jewelry case he destroyed as a reminder of his brief, unsuccessful career as a stunt driver. Number 1. One Bluesmobile still exists and it still runs. Of the 13 Bluesmobiles used in production, only one remains in original condition. It's owned by a private collector who bought it directly from the studio in 1980. This isn't a restoration or a replica. This is an actual screen-use car with all its battle scars intact. The cigarette burns in the seats from Dan Aykroyd's smoking, the dent in the roof from when a stunt went slightly wrong, the missing trim pieces that were never replaced. And here's the amazing part, it still runs. The current owner starts it once a month and drives it around his property. The original 440 engine is still there, still wheezing, still reluctant to start. The transmission still clunks into gear, the suspension still creaks over bumps. It's been invited to countless car shows, but the owner rarely takes it out. He's afraid someone will crash into it or it'll break down and need non-original parts. So, this piece of film history sits in a climate-controlled garage, occasionally venturing out to remind the world that yes, the Bluesmobile was real. The owner says he's been offered over $1 million for it. He's not selling. Some things, he says, are worth more than money. This car saved the orphanage, after all. And there you have it. 20 facts about the Bluesmobile that prove truth is definitely stranger than fiction. From Dan Aykroyd's secret license plate to John Landis nearly destroying himself in a jewelry store, this beaten-up Monaco has more stories than miles on its odometer. Which of these facts surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments below. And hey, if you enjoyed this dive into Blues Brothers history, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. We've got plenty more weird facts about your favorite movie cars coming up. Until next time, remember, they're on a mission from God. You know what's funny about movie cars? Most of them are garbage. I mean complete junk. They're usually cobbled together from whatever the prop department could find in their budget, slapped with some paint, and if we're lucky, they might actually run for more than 30 seconds before breaking down. But every once in a while, just often enough to keep us gearheads interested, Hollywood creates something that transcends its B-movie origins and becomes a legitimate piece of automotive history. And of all the cars that have ever graced the silver screen, burned rubber on celluloid, or made audiences gasp in theaters, none has achieved quite the same level of raw, primal, post-apocalyptic perfection as the last of the V8 Interceptors from Mad Max. Now don't get me wrong, I love movie cars as much as the next person, the Batmobile, Eleanor from Gone in 60 Seconds, even that ridiculous submarine Lotus from James Bond. They're all great in their own way, but there's something different about the Interceptor. Something visceral, something that makes you believe that if civilization really did collapse tomorrow, if the oil wars really did come, if we really did find ourselves fighting over the last drops of gasoline in the wasteland, this is exactly what we'd be driving. Or more accurately, this is what we'd want to be driving while everyone else is stuck with rusted out Volkswagens and shopping carts. The year was 1977. George Miller, a young Australian doctor turned filmmaker, had an idea, not just any idea mind you, but the kind of idea that sounds completely insane when you say it out loud. He wanted to make an action movie about a dystopian future where motorcycle gangs terrorize the highways and only the police stand between order and complete chaos. Oh, and he wanted to do it for about 350,000 Australian dollars, which even in 1977, money was basically nothing. That's about the cost of craft services on a modern Marvel movie. Hell, that's probably less than what they spend on Thor's hair extensions. But here's where things get interesting. Miller didn't want just any car for his protagonist. He needed something special. Something that would immediately communicate power, authority, and barely controlled violence. Something that looked like it could eat lesser vehicles for breakfast and spit out their chrome trim. The production team started with a 1973 Ford Falcon XB GT Coupe. Now, if you're American, you're probably thinking of those compact Falcons from the 60s. Forget those. The Australian Falcon was a completely different beast. Ford's Australian division had taken the basic concept and turned it into something altogether more aggressive, more muscular, more Australian, if that makes sense. The specific car they found was already pretty special. The XB-GT came from the factory with a 351 cubic inch Cleveland V8, putting out about 300 horsepower in stock form. Respectable numbers for 1973, especially considering the oil crisis was about to neuter performance cars worldwide, but respectable wasn't going to cut it for what Miller had in mind. This car needed to be a character in its own right. It needed presence. It needed to look like it could outrun the apocalypse itself. Enter Peter Arcadipone, a guy whose name you've probably never heard, but who deserves a place in the pantheon of automotive design gods. Arcadipone was tasked with turning this relatively sedate Australian muscle car into something that would haunt viewers' dreams. And boy, did he deliver. The first thing he did was completely rework the nose of the car. Out went the stock front end, and in went a custom fiberglass piece that looked like it was designed to punch holes through the air. Or enemies. Probably enemies. The nose cone, as it came to be known, completely transformed the car's personality. Where the stock XB GT looked muscular but civilized, this new front end looked absolutely feral. It was all angles and aggression, like someone had grafted a fighter jet's nose onto a muscle car. But Arcadipane wasn't done, not even close. He added a massive supercharger scoop that erupted from the hood like some kind of mechanical tumor. Now, fun fact that'll annoy purists at car shows, that supercharger, completely fake. The car wasn't actually supercharged in the first film. The blower was just a shell, a beautiful lie sitting atop a relatively stock engine. But you know what? It didn't matter. Sometimes the illusion is more important than the reality. The side pipes, though, those were real. 4 of them, running along each side of the car, looking like they were stolen from a dragster, which, knowing the film's budget, they probably were. These weren't just for show either. They were functional, and they gave the car a sound that was absolutely biblical. We're talking about the kind of exhaust note that makes small children cry and grown men weep with joy. The kind of sound that sets off car alarms 3 blocks away. The kind of sound that says civilization might be ending, but we're going out with style. But perhaps the most brilliant touch was the simplest. They painted it black. Not just any black, but a deep, menacing, light-absorbing black that made the car look like a shadow given form. Then they added just enough touches to break up the darkness. Yellow headlight covers that looked like predator eyes, a few subtle stripes, the police badges, and numbers. Because remember, this was supposed to be a police interceptor, the last line of defense against chaos. Though honestly, the car looked more likely to cause chaos than prevent it. The interior was equally purposeful, stripped down to the essentials, racing seats, a roll cage, a massive shifter that looked like it could double as a weapon. Everything you needed, nothing you didn't. This wasn't a car for comfort, this was a car for survival. The dashboard still had most of its stock components, but they'd been supplemented with additional switches and gauges that suggested capabilities the car might or might not have actually possessed. Again, illusion over reality. Miller understood that in cinema, what matters isn't what's true, but what feels true. Now, here's where the story takes an interesting turn. The first Mad Max film was released in 1979 and did reasonably well, especially considering its microscopic budget. It actually held the Guinness World Record for most profitable film for decades, returning something like $100 for every dollar spent. Not bad for a bunch of Australians running around the outback pretending the world was ending, but it was the sequel, Mad Max 2, or the Road Warrior as it was known in the States, where the Interceptor really became a legend. For the sequel, they needed to rebuild the car. Actually, they needed to build several versions. See, when you're making an action movie, especially on a limited budget, you don't just have one hero car. You have multiple versions for different purposes. There's the beauty car for close-ups, the stunt cars for the dangerous stuff, and sometimes a few shells for the really destructive scenes. For Road Warrior, they built at least 3 Interceptors, possibly more depending on who you ask, and this time, they decided to make some improvements. The supercharger, for instance. For the sequel, they installed an actual functional blower on at least one of the cars. A YN6-71 supercharger, to be exact, the kind of a thing you'd normally see on a top fuel dragster. Did it actually feed air to the engine? That's a matter of some debate. Some sources say yes, others say it was still just for show, but with a more elaborate setup to make it look functional. The belt was definitely connected to the engine, spinning the blower whenever the car ran, creating that distinctive whine that became part of the car's signature sound. They also refined the design. The The nose cone was redesigned to look even more aggressive if that was possible. The fuel tanks mounted on the rear were made more prominent because in a post-apocalyptic wasteland, visible fuel storage is both a necessity and a status symbol. It says, "I have a gasoline, and I'm not afraid to show it," which, when you think about it, is an incredibly bold statement in a world where people are literally killing each other over fuel. The transformation between films actually makes narrative sense, too. In the first film, the Interceptor is still relatively civilized. It's a police vehicle, albeit an extremely aggressive one. By the second film, after the complete collapse of society, it's been modified for pure survival. It's gained armor, lost any pretense of serving law and order, and become exactly what it needs to be, a weapon on wheels. What really made the Interceptor special, though, wasn't just its looks or its supposed performance, it was how it was filmed. George Miller and his cinematographer Dean Semler shot the car like other directors, shoot their leading actors, low angles to make it look imposing, beauty shots that lingered on its details. They understood that this car wasn't just transportation for Max, it was an extension of his character. When Max is strong, the Interceptor roars to life. When Max is vulnerable, the car is damaged or threatened. And when Max loses the car, which happens at the end of Road Warrior, it's genuinely tragic. I mean, spoiler alert for a 40-year-old movie, but the Interceptor gets destroyed, and it hurts to watch. The actual destruction of the car is one of the most memorable scenes in action cinema. The vehicle rolls multiple times, gets absolutely demolished, and ends up as a twisted wreck. They actually destroyed one of the stunt cars for this scene. No CGI, no miniatures, just good old-fashioned automotive carnage. Watching it is like watching the death of a character you've grown attached to, which in a way it was. But here's the thing about icons. They don't really die. The Interceptor's influence on car culture has been absolutely massive. You can see its DNA in everything from video games to custom car builds. There are hundreds, maybe thousands of replica Interceptors around the world. Some are faithful recreations, built on XB-GT platforms with all the correct modifications. Others are approximations, built on whatever was available and modified to capture the spirit, if not the exact specifications. The replica scene is actually fascinating, because XB-GT Falcons weren't exactly common to begin with, and they were only sold in Australia. Finding a base car for a proper replica is incredibly difficult and expensive. Clean XB-GTs can sell for 6 figures nowadays, and that's before you start adding the Interceptor modifications. So people get creative. They use XA Falcons, XC Falcons, even completely different cars that just happen to have vaguely the right shape. I've seen Interceptor replicas based on everything from Ford Mavericks to Chevrolet Camaros. Are they accurate? Not really. Do they capture the spirit? Absolutely. The process of building a replica is its own kind of madness. First, you need to source all the parts. The nose cone is typically fiberglass, and several companies make reproduction pieces. The quality varies wildly. Some are beautiful, exact recreations of the movie car. Others look like they were shaped by someone who'd only seen the movie once in the dark while drunk. The supercharger is another challenge, and real 6-7-1 blowers aren't cheap, and fake ones look, well, fake. The side pipes need to be bent just right. The stance has to be perfect. Too high and it looks like a 4x4. Too low and it loses that predatory crouch. And then there's the paint. You'd think black would be simple, right? Wrong. The movie car's paint changed slightly between films and even between scenes depending on the lighting. Some replicas go for a deep gloss black. Others try to recreate the slightly weathered look from Road Warrior. Some builders spend thousands just on paint, trying to get that perfect balance between menacing and beautiful. What's really interesting is how the Interceptor has transcended its original context. It's become bigger than Mad Max, bigger than Australian cinema, bigger than even car culture itself. It's a symbol of rebellion, of survival, of making do with what you have and turning it into something extraordinary. You see its influence everywhere. The Fast and Furious franchise, with its increasingly ridiculous automotive creations, owes a debt to the Interceptor. Every post-apocalyptic video game that features vehicles, from Fallout to Rage to the actual Mad Max game, references its design language. Even 35 years after Road Warrior, the car still has the power to stop people in their tracks. There's a replica that shows up at my local Cars and Coffee sometimes. It's not perfect, the proportions are slightly off, and the blower is obviously fake, but it doesn't matter. When that thing rolls in, everyone stops what they're doing. Kids who weren't even born when the movies came out somehow instinctively understand that this is something special. It's automotive presence in its purest form. The technical specifications of the original cars are actually a subject of some debate. You'd think after all these years we'd know everything about them, but they're still mystery. Part of this is because the cars were modified multiple times during filming, and not always in consistent ways. Part of it is because the people involved sometimes have different memories of what was done. And part of it is because, frankly, some details have been mythologized beyond recognition. What we do know is this. The base cars were 1973 Ford Falcon Exednote XB GT Coupes. The engines too were 351 Cleveland V8s, though the state of tune varied between cars. Some sources claim they were mostly stock, others insist they were significantly modified. The transmissions were a mix of automatics and 4-speed manuals, depending on what was needed for specific scenes. The suspension was reportedly stiffened and lowered slightly, giving the car that aggressive stance. The wheels were simple steel units, nothing fancy, because in the wasteland, you don't have time for pretty alloys. The weight distribution was supposedly altered by the additions to the car. That nose cone and the rear-mounted fuel tanks changed the balance, potentially affecting handling. Not that it mattered much for straight-line desert running, which is mostly what we see in the films. The car was built to look fast more than be fast, though by all accounts it was certainly no slouch in the performance department. One detail that often gets overlooked is the sound design. The noise the Interceptor makes in the films isn't entirely real. It's a combination of the actual car's exhaust, enhanced and modified in post-production, mixed with other engine sounds and effects. That distinctive supercharger whine, amplified and sweetened. The exhaust note, layered and processed. The result is a car that sounds like nothing else on Earth, a mechanical roar that's become as iconic as the visual design. Speaking of the visual design, let's talk about those side pipes for a moment. 4 per side, 8 total, running from just behind the front wheels almost to the rear axle. They're called zoomy headers in some circles, and they're completely impractical for street use. They're loud, they're hot, they throw flames, and they have basically no ground clearance, but they look absolutely incredible. They turn the car into a rolling piece of industrial sculpture, all function and aggression with no concern for pedestrian safety or noise regulations. The fuel tanks on the back are another wonderful detail. In the first film, they're relatively subtle. By Road Warrior, they're prominent features, these massive cylindrical tanks that suggest enormous range, but also incredible vulnerability. One bullet and boom, no more Interceptor. It's a perfect metaphor for the film's world, power and vulnerability in equal measure. Plus, they look cool as hell, like something stolen from a fighter plane or a drag racer. Now, let's address the elephant in the room, or rather the absence of an elephant. When Fury Road came out in 2015, everyone wanted to know, where's the Interceptor? The movie starts with Max driving what appears to be an Interceptor, but it gets destroyed in the first few minutes, and the car that replaces it, while cool in its own right, isn't the same. It doesn't have the same presence, the same personality. It's just another wasteland vehicle, albeit a very nice one. This was actually a deliberate choice by Miller. He wanted to show that in this new iteration of the Mad Max universe, even icons aren't safe. The Interceptor's destruction is symbolic of how much further the world has fallen. If the Interceptor represents the last gasp of the old world's power and technology, its loss means we're truly in uncharted territory. It's a bold narrative choice, but man, it hurt to watch that car get wrecked again. The Fury Road Interceptor was actually a fascinating build in its own right. They created it using a mix of real XB Falcon parts and custom fabrication. The attention to detail was incredible, right down to recreating wear patterns and damage from the original films. And then they destroyed it in the first 10 minutes. That takes guts. Or maybe sadism, possibly both. But even in destruction, the Interceptor's influence on Fury Road is obvious. Every vehicle in that film, from the War Rig to the Buzzard cars to a Morton Joe's Gigahorse, carries some DNA from the Interceptor. They all share that same philosophy of function over form, yet somehow achieving both. They're all built like someone raided a junkyard and a military surplus store and decided to create automotive fever dreams. The legacy of the Interceptor extends far beyond the films themselves. It's influenced an entire aesthetic movement. Apocalyptic chic, wasteland warrior, whatever you want to call it. You see it in fashion, in industrial design, in architecture, that mixture of brutality and beauty, function and form, necessity and excess. It all traces back to a black XB Falcon with a fake supercharger and some side pipes. Custom car builders around the world have internalized the Interceptor's lessons. It taught us that sometimes more is more, that subtlety is overrated, that if you're going to build something, build it like the world is ending tomorrow, and this is the last statement you'll ever make. The Interceptor didn't apologize for what it was. It reveled in it. There's also something deeply Australian about the Interceptor that resonates globally. Australia's car culture has always been about taking what the rest of the world gives them and making it their own. Ford and GM might have provided the platforms, but Australians turned them into something unique. The Interceptor is the ultimate expression of this philosophy. Take a fairly ordinary muscle car, add some fiberglass and attitude, and create something that Hollywood's millions couldn't improve upon. It's worth noting that the XB Falcon itself was already a pretty special car before it became the Interceptor. Ford Australia had basically been given free rein to develop their own vehicles, and they created something that was uniquely suited to Australian conditions. Long distances, rough roads, high speeds, intense heat. The XB was built to handle it all. It was tougher than its American cousins, more powerful than its European relatives. It was in many ways already a post-apocalyptic vehicle. Miller and his team just helped it realize its full potential. The economics of the Interceptor are fascinating too. Here's a car that was built for virtually nothing, from a base vehicle that wasn't particularly valuable at the time, that's now worth millions in cultural capital. Original XB GTs have skyrocketed in value primarily because of their association with Mad Max. Replica parts manufacturers have built entire businesses around reproducing Interceptor components. There are probably dozens of companies worldwide whose entire existence is owed to this one movie car, and yet, despite all the replicas, despite all the tributes and homages, nothing quite captures the original's magic. Maybe it's because we know the context. We know it was built on a shoestring budget by people who were making it up as they went along. We know it was held together with fiberglass and hope. We know that half its supposed capabilities were movie magic, and somehow that makes it even better. It's the ultimate underdog story. A cheap Australian movie car that conquered the world. The philosophical implications of the Interceptor are worth considering too. What does it say about us that this machine of violence and chaos has become such a beloved icon? Is it the car itself we love, or what it represents? Freedom, power, survival? Or is it simply that somewhere deep in our lizard brains, we respond to things that look like they could eat us? The Interceptor triggers something primal, something that bypasses rational thought and goes straight to the fight or flight response. I think part of the appeal is that the Interceptor represents competence in chaos. In the Mad Max universe, everything is falling apart. Society, technology, humanity itself, but the Interceptor keeps running. It's beaten, battered, held together with wire and willpower, but it keeps running. There's something deeply reassuring about that. No matter how bad things get, if you have the right machine and the right skills, you can survive. The Interceptor also represents a kind of honesty that's rare in movie vehicles. Most movie cars are fantasies. They're impossibly fast, impossibly tough, impossibly perfect. The Interceptor, despite its movie magic origins, feels real. It looks like something that could actually exist in its world. It has weight, presence, consequence. When it hits something, both objects take damage. When it runs, it needs fuel. When it breaks, it stays broken until someone fixes it. This authenticity extends to how the car was used in the films. The driving in Mad Max and Road Warrior is visceral in a way that modern action movies, with their CGI and green screens, can't match. When the Interceptor slides around a corner, that's a real car, with a real driver really sliding. When it crashes, that's actual metal, meeting actual ground at actual velocity. You can feel the weight, the momentum, the danger. It's automotive action at its most pure. The influence on video games deserves special mention. The Interceptor has appeared in countless games, either directly or as thinly veiled tribute. The Mad Max game from 2015 let players build and customize their own Interceptor-inspired vehicle, the Magnum Opus. It understood that half the appeal of the Mad Max universe is the vehicles, and it delivered in spades. But even in games that have nothing to do with Mad Max, you see the influence. Any game with vehicular combat, from Twisted Metal to Crossout, owes something to the aesthetic established by the Interceptor. The technical challenges of recreating the Interceptor for modern media are interesting too. When they needed to create new versions for Fury Road and the video game, they couldn't just copy the original. Modern safety standards, different available base vehicles, new manufacturing techniques, all meant that each new iteration had to be reimagined while staying true to the spirit of the original. It's like covering a classic song. You need to respect the original while making it your own. One aspect that often gets overlooked is how the Interceptor changed between its appearances even within the original films. In Mad Max, it's relatively clean, powerful, official. By Road Warrior, it's weathered, modified, personalized. The car ages with Max, becomes more battered, more dangerous, more desperate. It's visual storytelling at its finest. You can read Max's journey in the scratches and dents and modifications of his vehicle. The sound of the Interceptor deserves its own analysis. That combination of V8 rumble, supercharger whine, and straight pipe exhaust created an audio signature that's instantly recognizable. It's been sampled, imitated, and homaged countless times. There are YouTube videos that are just 10 hours of Interceptor engine noise. People use it as ringtones, alarm clocks, meditation aids. Okay, maybe not meditation aids, but you get the point. The sound is as iconic as the look. Let's talk about the drivers for a moment. Mel Gibson obviously became synonymous with the car, but the stunt drivers who actually performed the dangerous sequences deserve recognition. Grant Page, Max Aspin, and others put their lives on the line to make the Interceptor look as dangerous and powerful as the script demanded. They weren't just driving, they were performing automotive ballet at lethal speeds. Every slide, every jump, every near miss was calculated, yet had to look completely out of control. The maintenance and preservation of the surviving Interceptors is its own interesting story. Various cars from the films have survived in different states of repair. Some are in museums, some in private collections, some have been restored, others left in their post-filming condition. There's ongoing debate about whether they should be restored to pristine condition or preserved with their battle scars intact. It's the classic preservation dilemma. Do you preserve the artifact or the story? The cultural impact extends beyond car culture into broader design philosophy. The Interceptor popularized an aesthetic that we might call functional brutalism. It showed that something could be both utilitarian and beautiful, that exposed mechanicals and raw functionality could be more attractive than hidden complexity and smooth surfaces. You can see this influence in everything from modern motorcycles to architectural design. The idea that the machine should be honest about what it is. What would a modern Interceptor look like? It's an interesting thought experiment. Would it be electric, hybrid? Would it have sophisticated electronics or remain deliberately analog? Would it be built from a Tesla or a Hellcat? The beauty of the original is that it was built from what was available, what was practical, what worked. A modern version would need to respect that philosophy while acknowledging that the automotive landscape has changed dramatically. The gender politics of the Interceptor are worth noting too. This is traditionally such a masculine icon, all power and aggression and violence. But Furiosa's war rig in Fury Road showed that the Interceptor's design philosophy could be adapted and evolved. The war rig is essentially the Interceptor's spiritual successor, bigger, more complex, but following the same rules. Function first, intimidation second, survival always. There's something beautiful about how the Interceptor is aged. Unlike many movie cars that look dated or silly in retrospect, the Interceptor still looks absolutely perfect. It hasn't aged a day. If anything, it looks more relevant now than ever. As we face actual environmental collapse, actual resource scarcity, actual social breakdown, the Interceptor seems less like fantasy and more like prophecy. The economics of Interceptor replicas reveal interesting things about value and authenticity. A perfect replica built on an actual XB GT platform can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. A lookalike built on a different platform might cost a tenth of that. But which one captures the spirit better, the expensive perfect copy or the scrappy improvisation? There's an argument that the cheaper, less accurate builds are actually more true to the original spirit of making do with what you have. The Interceptor also represents a kind of automotive masculinity that's increasingly rare. Not the polished, perfect masculinity of a Ferrari or Lamborghini, but something rougher, more dangerous, more real. It's a working-class hero, a blue-collar warrior. It's the car for people who fix their own stuff, who understand machines, who value function over fashion. Although, ironically, it's fashionable as hell. We should also acknowledge the environmental irony of the Interceptor. Here's a gas-guzzling V8 monster that exists in a world destroyed by wars over oil. It's both the problem and the solution, the cause and the effect. It runs on the very resource that caused the apocalypse. There's something deeply human about that contradiction. We know what's destroying us, but we can't help but love it anyway. The craftsmanship that went into the original builds is remarkable considering the constraints. This wasn't a big-budget Hollywood production with unlimited resources. This was a bunch of Australians in a garage with fiberglass and determination. Every panel, every pipe, every detail had to be figured out on the fly, built by hand, made to work with whatever was available. It's shade tree engineering at its finest. The photography and cinematography of the Interceptor established visual languages that are still used today. Those low-angle hero shots, the way light plays off the black paint, the silhouette against the desert horizon. It created a template for how to shoot cars that made them look mythical rather than mechanical. Every car commercial that makes a vehicle look powerful and dangerous owes something to how the Interceptor was filmed. Let's not forget the merchandising. The Interceptor has been turned into everything from die-cast models to t-shirts to video game skins. There are Interceptor hot sauces, energy drinks, probably underwear. It's become a brand independent of the films. You could show the silhouette of the Interceptor, people who've never seen Mad Max, and they'd probably still recognize it as something significant. The Interceptor's influence on the custom car scene cannot be overstated. It gave permission for builders to go wild, to prioritize aggression over elegance, function over form. It showed that a car didn't need to be pretty in the traditional sense to be beautiful. It could be brutal, dangerous, even ugly, and still be absolutely perfect. It expanded the definition of what a cool car could be. There's also the fascinating phenomenon of people who've never seen the movies but know the car. The Interceptor has transcended its source material to become a standalone cultural icon. It's like people who know Darth Vader but have never watched Star Wars. The image is so powerful, so immediately compelling, that it doesn't need context to work. The engineering challenges of making the Interceptor actually function as shown in the films would be considerable. The aerodynamics alone would be a nightmare. That nose cone might look aggressive, but it would create tremendous lift at high speed. The side pipes would cook anything they passed. The weight distribution would be all wrong. The supercharger, if functional, would require massive supporting modifications, but none of that matters. In the world of Mad Max, physics takes a backseat to presence. In conclusion, the Interceptor isn't just a movie car. It's not even just a cultural icon. It's a philosophy made metal. It represents human ingenuity in the face of adversity, beauty in brutality, hope in hopelessness. It shows us that even when everything falls apart, we can build something extraordinary from the pieces. It tells us that survival isn't just about lasting longer, but about maintaining your identity, your power, your dignity, even as the world burns around you. The last of the V8 Interceptors. A piece of history, a machine of war, a work of art, a legend. It started as a cheap Australian cop car and became one of the most recognizable vehicles in cinema history. Not through massive budgets or sophisticated effects, but through vision, creativity, and the fundamental understanding that sometimes, just sometimes, a car can be more than just a car. It can be a symbol, a statement, a character in its own right. And perhaps that's the real tragedy and triumph of the Interceptor. It showed us what's possible when imagination meets determination, when limitation breeds innovation, when someone looks at an ordinary machine and sees the potential for something extraordinary. The Interceptor didn't just capture our imagination, it expanded it. It showed us that the apocalypse doesn't have to be boring, that even in the wasteland, there's room for style. Every time someone builds a replica, every time a kid draws it in their notebook, every time someone hears a V8 rumble and thinks of the wasteland, the Interceptor lives on. It's become immortal in a way that few machines ever achieve. Not bad for a fake police car with a non-functional supercharger built in a shed in Australia. Not bad at all.